Poland, etc. They're flying tonight to coordinate the evacuation of Indian citizens at the border. So they're actually saying, do not, because there's a backlog of 300,000 people at the borders. And they've actually told Indian students to not rush to the border, but wait till arrangements are made by the ministers and the officials at the border to receive them. Because what they found was after they cross the border, they're stuck because they don't have a visa, they just have a paper, and they'll not be allowed to travel anywhere within Poland, for example. So,
insight I can share on this issue. One of my personal friends is the head of immigration for Sweden. He's the general director of Migrationsverket, as every Swede knows, as Johan can confirm. His name's Mikkel Ribbinvik, and I'm honored to consider him a personal friend. He's one of the most kind of highly, for a minute, he was the most important person in Sweden during the Syrian refugee crisis, and where he made the personal decision to allow Syrians to come in to Sweden, but Afghanis could not. And so you had tens of thousands of Syrians and Afghanis approaching the Swedish borders. And the border immigration agents were instructed that and Swedes do everything by the law was Syrians are in a war. There's a war going on in Syria. So you can be a refugee from a war at that time. This is 2016. Afghanis were not in a war at that time. Afghanis would love to go to Sweden, but you have an Afghani passport. Afghanistan's not in a war, so we cannot accept you as a refugee from a country that you're not seeking. Your country's not in a war. You're not escaping from an existential crisis. The Syrians are technically, legally. So we can accept Syrians, but not Afghanis. And they look identical when they're approaching the border to a Swedish immigration guard. But depending on your passport, and then it got even more complex, as Johan very well knows, because Johan took them in as a foster home for the refugees who came into Sweden. As God bless his heart for doing that. And of course, the Afghanis said, "Oh, but I'm Syrian, but I don't have my passport." That complicates issues. And then there's another issue, which is if you're under the age of 18, you don't need a passport at all. All children are allowed in. So you had a lot of people who over the age of 18, some as old as 40, claiming, I'm under the age of 18, I don't need a passport. And they're Afghani men, 40 years old, pretending to be 18-year-old Syrian men. You see the issue here. So what's going on the Poland border, there might be a little more than just it might not just be simple racism. It might be we are accepting people with Ukraine passports to enter Poland. If you don't have a Ukraine passport, you cannot enter. It's very likely this has nothing to do with racism. If it's any way similar, and I imagine it might be, what happened in Sweden with the Syrian refugees.
I understand that. Exactly. I understand that. Tyler, remember, I was a refugee myself. I remember when I was a refugee, a teenager in Kenya, I got accepted into Canada because Ethiopia was in war, and that I was political asylum while somebody else from Uganda or others were rejected. I really understand that inside out, and I know what you mean. That what Sweden did, or even Germany did, taking in 1 million refugees from Syria and try not to take some of the economic immigrants from Africa or something. I understand how the immigration process works sometimes, but this is people leaving a war-torn area for safety from the exact same place. So they have to come up with a solution. These are people that what is that, strikes happening as we all saw it, and everybody is being affected by the same. It doesn't matter if you are a tourist in Ukraine, or you are a Ukraine born Ukrainian, or you are whoever and wherever you may be, or a visa student from India or from Nigeria. They all are being impacted the same way. Nobody is political asylum, nobody is economic asylum. They all are fleeing from dying so that they don't get bombed by these strikes from Russia. So what I'm saying is they can come up with emergency to let people in. This is not immigrating. People are not immediately immigrating. They're just trying to get a shelter so that they can be in safety for temporarily, and they can keep them in it, and they can do anything they want. They shouldn't keep them in the border. I mean, there is a lot. Even Stephanie Hagari or somebody who tweeted it, and I think the Nigerian authorities were even looking, is saying a Nigerian medical student who got into Poland border told me the guard told her to stay there, and she was 7 hours to cross. She said she was just staying there while everybody else is let in. So I understand how immigration works when you are asking for asylum versus you are getting temporary shelter.
Right.
That's what
So
I...
here would be my advice to a non-Ukrainian trying to flee Ukraine for safety, which would be to go to Moldova, which is almost certainly easier to get to anyways. So Moldova has been a very, very important reason for that, which is Poland is part of the EU. So is Romania. Trying to enter the EU, crossing an EU border is magnitudes more difficult than crossing the Ukraine-Moldova border, which is completely porous. It's barely checked to the degree that the EU border is between Ukraine, Romania, Ukraine, Poland, Ukraine, Slovakia, Ukraine, Hungary. Go to Moldova. I would say go to Belarus, but that might not help. But Moldova would be a perfect example. You go to Chisinau, and I've taken the train from Ukraine to Moldova. It was a very lovely ride, in fact. The other issue is the escaping Ukraine. Many countries were telling their embassies and their citizens to shut down and leave weeks ago. I understand people, even the Ukrainians were, for whatever reason, and this is one of the interesting points that is worth debating, is I just watched Vice News is on the ground in all over Ukraine, and they have one of the reporters is on the ground in Kiev, and he made the point that the citizens of Kiev were willfully in disbelief that these attacks were going to happen until they actually started, even though American intelligence was warning people, even as a week in advance, that this is coming. Our intelligence says this is happening. This is actually a strike. He's going to attack. And a lot of people in a lot of places denied it, including a lot of people in Kiev who now find themselves in the uncomfortable situation of having to flee. There's not a lot of American fleeing because Americans were telling the American intelligence community was telling the American embassy and the Americans in Kiev, get the fuck out of there. They're going to attack. And maybe I have I must have inherited an incredibly strong neurotic or survival instinct to flee when there's very little cost of fleeing to save my life. I don't understand why risking my life to stay in a city for 48 more hours. So
I'm gonna push. I think I'm
Tyler,
gonna push. I'm sorry, Tyler.
especially when the expense of leaving will go up tremendously if I'm wrong. Meaning, if I leave now, there's a train right there. I can get on it right now. If I'm wrong and the attacks do happen and the trains are not available and now I got to go on foot or somehow hitchhiking or on buses several thousand kilometers. Ukraine is huge, by the way, to that makes it more expensive, more costly, more difficult than everything else. I would rather do it on my own terms, my own convenience. When there are hundreds of thousands of troops surrounding the country I'm in, and the guy is a bit unhinged, I'm out of there. I'm out. I'm so
But
completely out of there. So
Tyler,
I'm
I'm
willing
sorry, but
to I'm willing to hear the arguments for what
Hey,
how the
yeah,
people.
Messi,
I'm
what's your
I'm
let
so
Messi get it out. Just like
Go ahead.
I get your point, Tyler. I get it
yeah,
totally.
exactly. But Tyler, I'm sorry. Not everybody is like you who has maybe has all those opportunities to learn and see different things. So these are maybe people who just got scholarship to go to Ukraine and study in some of the the Eastern Europe countries. So they came in and they were told by Ukrainian officials. Zelensky himself was saying that the
Right.
US is being a little bit exaggerating and a little bit scaring people. Stay calm. This is not going to happen. So if you're a student who got there on a scholarship and you're thinking, you know what, the government is saying this, so I will see until it happens, and the whole thing blew up fast. So now, when everyone is trying to get out, and one of the things that's not even working in what you said is that there is credible report. Here is what the Nigerian official said. There have been, unfortunately, reports that Ukrainian police and security personnel are refusing to let Nigerians board buses and trains. So it's not only the Poland allowing them to enter their country. It is even Ukrainians. When it's crowded, they are not letting them. They are letting Ukrainians to live first. So I'm sorry. I went through as a young
precisely
person.
why
So
precisely why I would
I'm
take
gonna.
the empty seat and not risk being uh, having my options or decisions made for me. I deeply inherited a flee when shit looks negative. When I went to Ukraine many years ago, and there were the armed, you remember before all this happened, I said the Ukrainians are going to fight before the attacks happened. I said if the Russians come in, make no mistakes, the Ukrainians are going to fight, no question. You heard me say that in this room because I asked them, why are all of you standing on the street corners 24 hours per day? 3 in the morning, doesn't matter. 24 hours a day, every single street corner. Years ago, the Ukrainians are standing there on guard, ready. Even then, that was a sign for me that I don't belong here. I'm not going to stay here for more than 48 hours because there are guards on every block years ago. That was enough for me to say, I'm not going to stay here. This is not a safe place to be. I don't want to be in a place where the locals are standing on every street corner with machine guns in their army fatigues because they feel there's a threat coming. That was a signal to my Darwinian evolutionary survival of the fittistism to get the fuck out of there. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but now a whole
I
bunch of
think
people are stuck there. So it's
Well, they
almost
were stuck
you
there
know.
and they decided to stay despite the fact that the locals have been standing on the street corners every day, 24 hours a day for fucking years.
Yeah, but
So
now we
so
just got to
this is
handle the
you're
situation.
right.
No, I
I
get it.
went, I
I
went
get
down
it.
the
But
alley where I heard the woman being raped, and I just thought, I'll just hang out down there. What could happen?
So
well,
Tyler, this is Danish.
yeah.
Sorry,
Go
just
ahead,
wanted
Danish.
to. I have to jump off in a few minutes, so I just wanted to say this because I think part of it is also it's very regressive. I think Messi was mentioning about students, but there are also people in Ukraine that are living paycheck to paycheck, barely making ends meet. They may not have those resources, and I understand your point about people that do have resources, but I want to be very thoughtful because my wife and her
Yeah,
family, and
but
of course, Afghanistan is very,
honest,
very different.
my ticket. By the
Afghanistan
way,
is very, very different.
I'm sorry to interrupt. My train ticket from Odessa to Ukraine to Moldova, I think, was $3.
And that's fair. But the point that I'm making is that people who are living paycheck to paycheck or barely living on, they can't take and uproot their entire family and leave, so easily. And the example I was going to give was my wife's, family when they left Afghanistan. It was, they were barely living hand to mouth, like, from they would have enough food to eat for that day, and they were working. So if they left, even with a $3 ticket, they wouldn't know where their next meal would come from. They had no savings. And I think that, of course, right now, it seems, hindsight's 2020, but when your government, and, again, everybody's talking about how great Ukraine has been, and I think that's fair. But Ukraine also knew this was going to happen, and they were, at some level,
Yes.
You can call it propaganda, you can call it whatever, but they were telling their own people, nothing's going to happen. This is all BS. And now they're, the same government, by the way, that the whole world, and I know I'm going to get canceled for this, but the whole world is saying, oh, they're such freedom fighters. By the way, let me just be very clear. This has happened in other countries, and not all those leaders were seen so positively as Zelensky and Ukraine. If you really want to be critical, I think that is where the criticism should go. The average person that's barely hanging on, that is barely living, is the one that will suffer the most, because they're the ones that trust their government. They're the ones that trusted their government, and they made that mistake.
Tyler, just an update. The students, Indian students who stayed there a month back, they were informed that they are not going to get leaves, and they are not to be. There would not be any online classes. So these two things were spoken a month back. Some of them said, "Do hell with the semester. I'll leave." Some of them stayed on the assurance, okay, why to miss the classes? And if there is no online classes, so this is for the medical student who stayed there.
Armish?
And yeah.
Can you please make this? So, Piotr, I'm going to hand it to you. Okay. I just want to make sure I understand what Armish is trying to say before I hand it to you. What was the first point? I understand the second point is there would be no online, but what was the first point?
There would be no the college would continue to operate. So they would not. So even if these emergencies are coming in, we would not the students requested that to the college administrations. They're different. They'd say, okay, just give us some off, 30 days off. We'll resume our semesters.
Right.
But they did not approve that. Yeah. And the second point was there would be no online class. So they said, okay, let us go back and let's have online classes. The world is operating on online classes. Why should we? Okay. So they said no, there's no. And the third point, the student was saying that even if they had intimidated us, we could have at least walked to the Polish or the Romanian border on foot with some food, snacks. But this all came off a sudden. So yeah, of course we know it's a crisis situation, everything. But somehow people have this feelings which people have this feeling, not myself necessarily, that somehow, and in the extremists, somehow that some people are trying to use those students as a shield as well. So a lot of emotions are flying around. That's what I'm trying to say.
So Tyler, just really quickly on that, look at the behavior of the colleges, of the government. They're like, why would I give you leave? Yeah. Everything is fine. Right. So who do you think that actually hurts?
Exactly.
Who do you think it actually hurts? It hurts poor people. And that's what I'm trying to say, which is like, we have to be very careful to blame the people for this as a mistake, when in reality their government was brainwashing them. And we have to admit that was what was happening in Ukraine, no matter how much we want to support Ukraine.
Sorry, I'm gonna.
Piotr's been waiting on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter today because if you don't know me, guys, I'm Piotr. I'm on Clubhouse. I'm running the room that has been going now for 80 hours. We've had 202,000 people come in. So I'm breaking up, allowing other people to speak whilst I'm on Twitter. So look, on the racial side of this humanitarian crisis, it's extremely delicate. Migration is obviously one of the most highly charged and sensitive topics in any scenario, let alone the fallout from war. The students that were affected comprised a large amount of African diaspora as well as Indian people. There have been different reports about treatment. Now, I think it's important to remember that Poland has a very, very right-wing party. The Law and Justice Party, or PiS Party as it's known in Polish, is very right-wing. They have a very restrictive immigration policy at the best of times, but also they have a quite a strong suppression of certain, shall we say, minority group rights. And that's not just racial, that's the LGBT community has seen some of their liberties diminished, and some of the women rights have also been compromised in recent bills that have been passed through the parliament. So Poland's not the best example to use. It is facing the brunt of the migration flows. But what we are trying to do is encourage migrants or refugees rather to go to Hungary or maybe Moldova and Romania particularly. Those two countries are closer and they have more opening borders. The Moldovians, as far as I'm aware, have accepted upwards of 15,000 migrants or something like that, and are far, and this is, there's less reports of sort of issues at the border, shall we say. Every country has a right to manage its borders, but in humanitarian crises like these, it's a difficult balance between having an open door policy to support migration flows versus also wanting to make sure that those people are taken account of, given dual care, processing, and so on and so forth. The other element in that complicates all of this is COVID. We've barely touched upon the impact of COVID, not just in this room, but across like any discussion.
This is bullshit. This is clear BS. What he said, what he's just saying is clear BS. The last point of COVID.
Hang on 1 second. Hey,
no, I'm not finished.
Hang on.
So this is BS.
I wasn't.
No, you can't do that.
Thank you. It's not
let him finish his statement.
You haven't actually let me finish what I was going to say, so do not interrupt me when I haven't even given context on what I'm making my point about. The role of COVID is very prevalent in the conflict. The Russians have a terrible uptake of the vaccine, and so we're seeing some reports that there are, issues with the immunity of soldiers. And I'm not saying this is going to suddenly create a new version of COVID. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying we have to consider the transnational issue of the pandemic. It's nothing to do with the migrants. I'm not saying COVID is going to be cropping up against the migrants. I'm just saying that even with the pandemic, the Polish and others have said they haven't been checking restrictions. They haven't been checking vaccination passports or anything like that. So that's actually what I was going to say. So I don't particularly appreciate you saying bullshit. Thank you, Amish.
It's okay, Armish, it's your turn now.
Broadly,
Armish,
I want to just
Piotr, let him actually.
We had the discussions on the ceasefire today. The Ukrainians seem to be on the upper hand.
Just go on and on. That's why people say BS to you.
Lost casualties of about 5,500.
Can't hear
Can't
you.
hear me. Have I gone?
Yeah, hold on, Piotr. Cal wants Armish to...
Yeah, no, all I'm saying, Piotr, one of the reasons why people might be saying BS to you, I'm just going to give this to you directly, is because you've got to have a pause so people can come in, okay? So I totally am saying that he shouldn't have said BS to you, and Armish, don't do that again on our rooms, right? That's not right. But Piotr, if you give him a pause, he can come in and say something, because you do have a lot to say. So Armish, can you come in and say what you want to say without using the word BS? Thank you.
Yeah, so I want to say that the COVID thing is, sorry, what I said, because
your mic
there has been
your mic
welcome.
Hold on, but your mic is super loud. Could you turn your mic down about 50%?
Is it better?
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. So, COVID, the virus doesn't differentiate between people from, let's say, Ukraine and India. There has been groups of people who are fleeing, of course, the crisis situation and entering into Poland, who happen to be the Ukrainian national, and they are not following any COVID norm. So why? So that COVID restriction doesn't apply there. It's only when supposedly when Indian or African students are walking in, suddenly why COVID would be used as a shield. So we have seen the border migration there, and people are moving in with bunch in groups, flouting the COVID norm, and people are receiving on the other side of Hungarian border, who are in groups, who are basically setting up stalls, having songs together in groups, like hugging. So there is no COVID norm. That's the point I said, which sounds like BS. Sorry. So I have to say that.
So can I add a different perspective?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Vinay.
Yeah. So everyone says that, in times of crisis, there's a chaos and confusion everywhere. So we are now assuming the worst of intentions on policies, race, etc. And it's important to step back from it. And to what Amish said, if you're going to apply some kind of process like COVID, it's got to apply to everyone. rules or laws to allow people from certain countries to come in. I think there's a whole bunch.
Is it
I
me
think,
that I think we're
I
losing
can't
I
part of
hear
your
you.
think,
You're
audio.
yeah,
cutting
yeah.
out.
I think
So,
we're losing you, Vinay.
uh,
And then you're on and
okay.
off.
Is this better now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, so I was just saying we need to step back and take a look at multiple issues. And what one good thing is that governments, I think Nigeria is doing it, even India's done it. They're sending their officials to the borders, talking to these countries like Poland, and all of these countries are saying, yep, if there's a system there, we will let your citizens through. So that's already started to happen. I think Amish knows 4 ministers from the Modi government are flying today to 4 different countries and setting up those systems. But there's another article, Tyler, I just tweeted to you. A few days ago, we talked about Chinese. The Chinese government had asked them to put flags and not evacuate. The latest one is now the Chinese embassy saying, please do not put flags. Do not identify yourself as Chinese because they're being heckled by by the locals there because of what happened with China abstaining and
Rightly so.
supporting Russia.
I will just
Could I
quickly
come in
add
with a
two
comment though?
things if I can. Just quickly, two things if I can. I will repeat again. Even the Ukrainian police is not allowing the Black Africans to board when buses and trains are full. It's not only to enter into Poland or other neighboring countries. Two, there is also when there is this type of shortage and less transportation to get out of the country, you try to get out with whatever you get. You don't plan to say, oh, I'm going to go to Moldova and I'm going to let the other train pass me or this or that. I have been in a chaos situation myself. You just jump in the first thing you get in front of you. So those are the two key things that you think about. And when you are a scholarship, like Dr. Danish was saying, when you are a scholarship student, you take into a lot of things and you wait for the last minute. The government was giving, even Zelensky was saying that it's not going to happen. Let's not make it scary. So they listen to that government. Other, they really don't want to lose their scholarship. They are getting that opportunity to better their lives. So they got that and they got it and they don't want to lose it until the school says, okay, you can leave and then you can come back anytime. So there are many, many things we should consider instead of blaming the victim here.
So if I
Yeah.
could just add
Oh,
something
so I
from
think
just
Victoria's trying to speak. Yeah,
thank you,
is that
Carl.
right? Is that
When,
Victoria?
when you say
Yeah.
blaming the
Go
So
victim,
ahead.
you mean
can you hear me? So from a practical perspective, so I'm part of a social network and that sort of global network. And in Europe, what we have done is basically mobilize sort of rehousing efforts for people who are fleeing from the Ukraine, because we have a number of people who come from there anyway. Now, just to the point, I think it was Piotr that made about migrants. One of the things that we actually have been hearing from the people on the ground in Germany is that it's actually not necessarily a good idea to apply for asylum wherever you're going. So the key thing we've been doing is just initially trying to rehouse people, but being mindful of the fact that if people are being, asking for asylum, they're going to end up being sort of moved and have completely no say over where they're going. And they may well go back to the kinds of places like Poland that are going to give them less of a sort of safe or equitable time. And it's also worth noting, so I guess I'm saying in terms of following the sort of normative legal channels, we have to be mindful of that, especially when it concerns those who are being subjugated on account of race. I would also say, with regards to who we blame and how we look at this, I mean, I think it was maybe today or yesterday, the Ukrainian president was talking to the BBC, and his exact phrase was, how upset he is seeing the blonde and blue-eyed people being, sort of killed and all the rest of it. And so we do need to think about the role that bias plays at the highest levels, and not really just think about, well, how do we, who are we going to blame? Maybe it's not race. Well, there is a culture of bigotry, and what does that actually mean? Then it informs who has autonomy and agency over where they go and how. To Meseret's point, and apologies if I mispronounce your name, have a scholarship, you're not going to put it in jeopardy by being, as active or potentially just aberrant in your behavior, or taking the first flight out, making the first whatever, until you're sure that this is what everyone is doing and what it seems to be okay to do, so that you aren't, uniquely penalized for making that kind of choice ahead of time, or when everyone else is saying everything's all right. You have to be really, really mindful of that particularly delicate balance. So I think there are, we have to think about it. It's not just, oh, these people are right wing and they have this. We have to think about, well, if there is, if there isn't, clearly there is racism, bigotry, so forth. What does that actually mean in terms of how it impacts how much agency people have over the choices they can make when they're based there, and where they can move next, and what the consequences will be when they are back to any kind of hypothetical peacetime, or even before that, or in the interim. And so those are the things that I think, we need to navigate. It's not just a case of let's not overblow it and call it racism. It is, but there's more nuance to be found than just giving it that mark or not. And then we have to think more charitably about the actions of the individuals who are ultimately subjected, to that racism, in terms of how they then get to make choices as they sort of navigate where they go next and how they flee and all those sorts of things. So those are the sort of the key points I wanted to make there.
Tyler, may I say something, please?
Erwin, you are always welcome to say whatever you like, and you're encouraged more. My feeling about you, Irvin, is every time I hear your view, and there's a few other folks. Robert, very specifically, I'm looking forward to his thoughts. You and Robert, in my mind, always bring us back down to some kind of ground truth. So I'm looking forward to your comments, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. First off, I want to say welcome to the 21st century, because before war, even with the Vietnam War, which was our first televised war, we didn't get to see all this, the undercurrent of what goes on.
Fucking
So
great.
welcome to the 21st century and the reality of what goes on when the fog of war descends on a nation. I've been in some other rooms lately, and one of the things that came up, this same conversation has come up many times over the last 2.5 days that I've been in other rooms. I went out and tried to do some back study and figure out what was going on. And someone sent me a article from I mean, it was Op India, I think it was from. And one of the things that was said in there, it was a young Indian girl trying to get out. And what was said to her was this: if your country didn't support us, why should we support you? There were some Africans, and unfortunately, Africa is a continent of 54 states where India is one country. So there are students there from all over Africa. Maybe there's a majority from Nigeria or from Ghana, but I'm quite sure that they are separated. And so the governments, unlike the US, Canada, that have all of this intelligence and knew to get their people out at beforehand, maybe didn't share that information with some of the other countries in Africa, where those governments could make those choices early enough to get their people out, get those students out. Now, I spoke to some people in Ghana, and they were actually trying to raise money individually, trying to get students out of there because the government had not acted. So I just, once again, my thesis here is welcome to the 21st century, and we get to see the underbelly of what it really looks like. And, Tyler, I was in Ukraine probably around the same time you were, when people were standing on the corners with guns and Kalashnikovs and, and guarding their country. I spent 6 months there. I love Ukraine. I knew that they would fight.
Yeah.
I kept telling people when this first started, it's going to be a fight. They aren't going to just roll over, because they really do respect their independence.
Yeah.
And as much as we don't know about the history of that region, Ukraine was there before Moscow was. And the Cossacks, from the border of what is now currently Russia down to central Ukraine, was Cossacks. And believe me, they just don't roll over.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, as far as this color thing, welcome to the 21st century. Now we have to deal with realities. And this is why we as people, human beings on this planet, are going to either learn how to care about each other, or we're going to keep making excuses for people that don't. My name is Irvin. Thank you for letting me share.
As someone with Cossack heritage, I can certainly reaffirm what you just said about the Cossacks.
Okay. Is there?
Tyler, can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Nicholas. I'm curious to hear what angle you take with this, because I know you're a fan of the meta angles,
Yeah.
which are developing in really interesting ways in the past 24, 48 hours over the weekend. So I'm curious to hear what's going on.
Well, yeah, absolutely. As first of all, I also look forward to Robert's views, and I think his views are well observed. To your points, you made, I think, the interesting point, which is, from a survival perspective, you have said you're going to get the hell out of there, right? And so here are some of the meta thoughts. So first of all, humans work in a mode of fitness versus truth. That is the survival of the fittest, as you've heard me say before, is about the fitness of your decision making. So the fitness of your decision making, Tyler, was of course that $3 is nothing to get out of town when there are gunmen on the corners. But it's relatively easy for you to make that fit choice. So if we just take that as the basis, the meta basis, everybody who's there is going through fitness versus truth. Now, the truth is the narratives that you've been sold. There is no subjective truth as your truth. So everybody is in their own truth bubble when they're listening to their nation states, or they're listening to their friends, and they're listening to their colleagues. But fitness is at the individual level. So this is about the individual and the collective. And we are all operating under this survival of the fittest, but everyone's got their different heat temperature to that fitness function. The one thing I will say is that, having been through being third generation from refugees, that what I learned from speaking with a friend of mine who had escaped, his father had escaped from 8, he was a British serviceman, he'd escaped from 8 concentration camps, and he'd been in Auschwitz. And I'd said to him, I had this nagging question, why didn't those who were not, you escaped 8 times, why didn't other people escape? He said, well, first of all, people tried, but they died. And he said, really, the fundamental thing that I can tell you, this is a first person report, he said, is that no one runs to certain death. So that always was in the back of my mind. So to your first point, I think we have to understand that the key to success in life is, and we've seen this from behavioral economics, from Kahneman and Tversky in the economic field, is loss aversion. People don't want to lose what they have. So you have to get over the fear of loss. And for most people who've scrabbled, like we're saying with these students, to get a scholarship, they have very high loss aversion, and they have a desire to hear, inverted commas, the truth that allows them to remain in place. So the key to running in history has been to go first and be positive. This helps you win economically, but it also helps you if you're constantly under persecution. So that's at the meta level. At the practical level, what I think, the few things that I wanted to comment on that I heard is the Chinese flag display point. And, don't worry, guys, display the Chinese flag is assuming the Russians will win.
Right.
Don't display the flag, implies, guys, we actually think that, the tide is changing. So I think that's a very important message. And people, and Piotr said this in his rooms over the, is you've got to read what people are doing. And I don't give a shit about the micro news. It's all nonsense to me. I don't know. Yes, I'm happy for good news, but I don't know good news from bad. So this is where the truth at that point is suspect. So we have to look at the fittest decisions. So the fittest decisions is to run if you want to get out of the country, and then we have to face another fitness versus truth. We want to think that the bordering countries are going to see brown and people of color in the same way as they see their fair-skinned neighbors. But we know from their behaviors, including, as was noted about the Polish, they are not very friendly to outsiders. And these are some of the sort of dirty truths. Like if you were in Hungary, you would know that they are being run, on the right wing, and they are not very welcoming, even to people that have been previously persecuted in their country. So I think we need to just admit that because our eyes see the delta,
the delta for those people is foreigners, and they've been told that foreigners are bad. And there's been a European view of this because we saw the Syrians, and they were not welcome. Well, they were welcomed in Germany, but they were not welcomed otherwise. And so we have to say, because those people are different looking, is the reason why they're not going to be received in the same way, however painful that is for us to admit. And then the final thing to say is that what we learn at the meta level is that when you're fleeing, you have to be an individual. But if you want to have power over the university, for example, if everyone would have left, they would have had to suspend the scholarships. The difference is you have to be the first person to run. And then you have to organize that everybody runs, so that the problem is with the university, not with the individual who's faced with the loss aversion. So this, again, is the example of the individual versus the collective. I think it is fair to say that the media collective has backed the Ukrainians because they look familiar. And that means that people can see that if this can happen to them, these fair-skinned people, it could happen to me. And this is something they hadn't seen before. And so we are in a new world order. The new world order is clearly shaking out between those who are going to positively help versus those who are going to abstain. And we are going to have to face the fitness of the decision that there are going to be three camps, those who are with us, those who are against us, and people who realize that we're all the same and we need to unite using technology above nation states run by lunatics.
I have a quick question. Is it well observed that it's the women of color are also not being allowed into Poland or given allowed on buses or whatnot?
Yes. So
Yes.
there is a case where a Sikh woman, she was feeding the baby in the train, and there's a proper video, and she was asked to stop feeding and get out of the train was stationary on this platform. She was made to come down.
But that might be because in their culture, you shouldn't be breastfeeding in public. My question is, at the border issue with either Poland or Hungary or whatever, my reason for asking is, as far as the Ukrainians go, the ones who are leaving are only women because the men are not allowed to leave. So if the people going into Poland are all women, with the exception of the men are only men of color, I want to know, are the women of color allowed in or not? Or are the women of color not allowed in? Because then we could have a much better sense for if this is a racially decided issue, or are they upset that you're a man of fighting age fleeing a conflict zone?
There is an interesting perspective here on the brain drain. So just as when the Soviet Union originally fell, a lot of intelligent or affluent people left the region, and I think a similar thing is happening right now with Ukraine. And with respect to Poland, as a Polish person myself who was a refugee who left when the Iron Curtain fell down, I can tell you that racism is not off-brand for Poland. It's disappointing, but it's not the first time that Poland has taken one giant leap back, especially recently with women's reproductive rights and other things. It's as if Poland has slipped back into the Middle Ages. So that's kind of a disappointing thing for me.
So, Tyler, your answer is yes. Even women students from India have not been allowed through the border.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, even women, Nigerian medical student actually was the one also trying to get help. I can send you the link in Twitter also as part of the Nigerian official speech.
Okay.
May I some update of the China citizens. First, of course, we read the news there say put your flag outside your house or stick it to your car. But the next day, actually, the embassy said don't put anything with red color, and now it's don't show anything that means you're from China, something, because of two things. First, of course, China is supporting Russia. That is the obvious truth. Secondly, the online forum, because they are those stupid. They are saying many violent words toward the Ukrainian woman, like for example, like we are gladly to take care of those fleeing Ukrainian women. So this also irritate the Ukrainians. So those study or work in Ukrainian Chinese, they are facing very difficult steps right now. And I've heard from the news they even try to pretend that they are Japanese when they go to the shelters. So yeah, that's some update from the China.
Okay, Carl's had his hand up over on the Twitter space stage for a while. Your hand must be getting tired, Carl. If you're still with us, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Much more eloquent and educated speakers on this needed to go first. I just wanted to say two things. One, specifically on the African crisis. Our very own Damalair actually has been working tirelessly for the past couple of days, expanding his network and connecting individuals on the site and surrounding countries, trying to facilitate communication and get refuge for people who are experiencing it. I'm trying to ping him into the room, but I think, to be honest, he's probably exhausted. But flowers to him. He's been doing an astounding job. He's been displaying true leadership. And just quickly on the topic we were just discussing, I'm just surprised that nobody mentioned the word hope. And Nicholas has always broke it down wonderfully, the human condition. But as we're discussing fight or flight, those are logical concepts of when you stick around and when you fight and what you do. But hope is kind of the illogical short circuit of all of that. It's illogical by nature. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have children, because on a factual basis, it's insane to bring children into the world, because it's just opening you up for more strife and everything else. A lot of these people, I think, are sticking around through hope. And I think that's a very individual thing. And it depends what property and assets you have in the area. It depends exactly what area of Ukraine you live in. And it depends, whether you have children and families and that kind of thing. But I don't think anybody can blanket statement and explain away why certain people have or haven't stayed or anything else. But yeah, thank you.
I want to address one issue, one misunderstanding that I think is quite overly concerningly present. And Piotr, I'd like your comment on this. The idea that I think Americans are fundamentally misunderstanding what's happening with this conflict, where normally Americans go into an area, and God knows we are guilty of this, and essentially going scorched earth and, just annihilating everything in sight. And this is a very, very different scenario. For example, Russia's trying to absorb Ukraine into Russia, and as deluded as it might seem, get the Ukrainians to accept, this kind of reunification. And because of that delicate scenario, you can't go in gun blazing and bombing everything in sight and killing civilians willy-nilly. So the approach is then to softly move forward until you start feeling resistance, and then retreat slightly, and then wait, and then slowly surround your target without making it feel like it's overly threatened. And then once it's surrounded, then you can wait patiently until it understands that you're not trying to be overly aggressive. And that is the normal approach of, the delicate, impossible dance that Russia's trying to do here. It's a very different approach than trying to wipe out an opponent. They're not trying to wipe out Ukraine and kill everybody in sight and then replace it with Russians. They want to keep the Ukrainians there. They want to keep the Ukrainian army there. They don't want to even kill the Ukrainian army. They want to just remove the singular person or few people in power, as tricky as that might seem. And this is why Americans are watching this unfold and be like, oh my God, this is a Russian army. They're retreating everywhere, and they're just walking into police stations saying, hey, can I get some gas? And Yeah, because they're not trying to annihilate everybody, and Americans are not used to this concept. It's a very foreign concept. So it's a very unique thing for Americans to play umpire or armchair umpire to what's unfolding because they've never dreamed of such a scenario. Imagine if America was trying to take over Canada and wanted to leave it Canada. It's going to keep the same name, Canada. It's going to work. All the hockey teams will stay the same. All the breweries will stay the same. We just want to convince them that it would be better if we took it over. Now imagine what that would be like compared to America going into the Middle East somewhere. And now you understand why it would look and smell and feel totally different than anything America's ever had to do before. And this is what Russia is trying to do. And when we watch this, we're utterly confused and are completely misconstruing what's unfolding and assume Russia's inept. Granted, there's plenty of evidence that they are not having their best moments. I'll grant you that. But I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what's happening. And I say this because I want people to be prepared for what is likely to happen next, which is Russia has enough manpower, feet on the ground, boots on the ground, to surround and enclose Ukraine, to control it without harming it, to force it into a negotiation of kind of settlement. And this is a potentially likely scenario. And it's, I think most people are not realizing the delicate dance of what's unfolding here. So it's going to get very weird in the weeks to come. Time will tell, of course, but I don't know if this has been discussed in other rooms, the nature of this theater that we're witnessing. Fyodor?
Spot on, Tyler. Spot on. This is Robert.
Carl, you have your hand up.
Sorry, I was going to ask. You mentioned it, the fact that we've seen a lot of reports that from Russian soldiers that they weren't given the intelligence that they needed. I was going to ask if there is any kind of credence to that. The fact that a lot of the forces seem to be unprepared, they seem to not really know what they're doing there, why they're there, where they're going. There's reports of media suppression in Russia, that a lot of Russians apparently don't really understand what's going on. But you kind of said that yourself. But one question I would probably counter with is, does it really matter? Does it matter if this is a ruse, if their ineptitude right now is a ruse, or does it matter if it is actually ineptitude? Because your point remains the same, and that Russia does have an enormous army that it can bring to bear. And whether it's planned to come in later or whether they're just scrambling to catch up at some point, those boots will arrive on ground.
Well, there's another interesting issue, which is that I've not heard other people express, but I'm not hanging out in the Ukraine rooms. But one of the things that I witnessed that I think is worth considering, and I did hear this said in the Vice piece that they just covered, which is Putin in his when he has his most trusted advisors around him, and I think there's a viral video that almost everybody has seen of the head of the intelligence agencies nervously stuttering and completely being dressed down in front of Putin about, if he agrees with Putin's assessment, should they recognize the independence of the, Donbass and whatever. And he's stammering and made to look like a fool because he's obviously nervous, as if he has a gun pointed at his head. Most of you have seen this video? I assume you have. It's gone.
Yes.
Viral. Right. Yeah. Now, my point is, what that tells me is our friend Putin has created an environment inside of his inner sanctum in the Kremlin where he has nothing but yes men who are completely incapable of expressing reality to him. So this is why it's so confusing. Why does Putin think that the Ukrainians want to join Russia when they clearly do not? It's because he's been lied to. He's being told, of course, Ukraine's going to welcome you with open arms. This is going to be a case.
So the question is, where's the tipping point?
Right.
This is, if we abstract away from the detail, the local detail, and we come to the macro, we're saying, like we were talking the other day, is, do we assume this is where we were Friday. There was a question. Do we think there'll be sanctions? Will the West use SWIFT? And what will be the response? Will we be in cyber warfare? Yes. Will we go to the SWIFT option? Yes. Will we deplatform them totally? No. Will we leave backdoors, for energy? Yes. Will, blah, blah, blah. That's
Keep
the
going.
macro level.
Yeah. Where do you?
Then the next step is, okay, where do we, for me is, and I voiced this in another room, and someone actually made a very good point in response. But I said, is the man insane? Where does he save face in this process, and where do the generals rise up and take down the supreme leader?
Amen.
Because it's in their best interest. So they operate under fitness versus truth. They are, they have gone along with this. They are all complicit. They all took the easy way out and compromise themselves. So we know they are weak men. They don't stand for the values. They will
Nicholas?
do whatever it is to gain power. They are power whores.
Yeah, Nicholas and others, I got a question.
Can I just finish?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just to finish the power horse story. So if we understand that everybody who kneels to a dictator is essentially a power whore, and that they've made a decision to go with their self versus the collective benefit because it suits them, right? That's the compromise they're in. They will go through that same calculus when they feel that their lives are in danger and the lives of their loved ones are in danger, which is the same calculus that's going on in the Russian street, which is resonating in the same way, as that these people look like us. These people are our cousins. And we never gave permission to go to war. And then you get all the lower degree stories about Russian morale and all the, the gossip, right? We don't know if that's true, but it would be indicating the wider move, which is the mood on the street. And that wider mood on the street then filters to the homes of the oligarchs and the homes of the generals. And they say, this guy's going to ruin everything for us. We went and sold our souls to the devil to be rich, not to have this guy blow it all up for us, because now it's all, locked and all the value's gone. So this is the games that are going on. So my thought is, how far will Putin go? And, how far will his, there's this idea of Hitler's willing executioners, those who went along and then ended up becoming executioners. No one volunteers to become an executioner, but you willingly get sucked into it. How far will the Shanghai Cooperation Organization of nations that are very well aligned and are abstaining from doing the right thing? Because if they, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, right? It's that the reason why they object to sanctions is because of their own human rights abuses. And so you find yourself caught. And that's, I think, to Robert's point, as this is the new world order, and we have a choice in this. We do. And we need to, like the students, unite to get behind, the good guys here, or, get behind values, not necessarily the good guys, because there is no subjective truth. Get behind, a consensus viewpoint that is not informed by misinformation and disinformation, but by our own golden rule, which is do unto others as you'd have done unto you. And so if you don't think it's right to go and invade somebody's country without provocation, then, that's where I think we're ending up. The only questions for me is, how insane is this guy?
Robert?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, just a question, and two questions real quick. And I know it's too early to have this particular discussion, Tyler, Kyle, Cheryl, and group, but it would be interesting when everybody's comfortable to have a discussion on the technology of what's going on. And I would love to be a part of that discussion. But I know it's too early to have that discussion.
What particularly is hot on your mind with regard to the tech?
It ranges from whether it's weaponry, finance, what's new, what's different, and not so much of what is happening, but the projection of the implications in the future. So, I mean, I know we're looking at today. I'm looking at the implications of what today means for tomorrow. So whether it is the drones, whether it's nanotechnology, you name it, whether it is medical usage in war, what the implications in tech on economies, things like that. So someday I'd be like,
on Tyler, there's one of the things I wanted to. There are a number of technology. Like if I go, I can't go as meta as Nicholas, but there are some broader, which is like there are the tech companies as we've been discussing over the last 6 months here, right? They are now actors, right? They are players in this game, and they have that whether they want to be or not, right? So they're getting forced to do certain things. They are basically political actors in this. This kind of I don't know the right word, but Nicholas would have the game, the meta thing that's playing out, right? So that's one discussion, right? And then of course there's all the technologies and how they play out in different places. So that's another thing we could either do today or ongoing. But the other thing, just Nicholas, I wanted to just clarify before we go into that. Just one thing you just said there around, and it's a question really broadly, but it's just I totally I find that Tyler, your point is really well made. That the people around him have basically made this guy like blind to a bunch of things. That's just from reading stuff and everything. I'm concluding that there's and I've seen that happen to leaders, right? Very very smart leaders who are good chess players or good Go
Business
players
too.
or yeah. Sorry, 1 second. And they're really good players, right? But they start to become quite dumb. Now the question to Nicholas's thing is that the generals around him, which I assume they're like kind of the operational country kind of leaders, and then they're all connected to the oligarchs who are distributed all around the world, right? Some of them are buying up Oxford University, some of them are buying up Stanford. They're all over the place, right? I guess they would come into play as well, right, Nicholas, in that game if they
Yeah, the
yeah.
oligarchs are stores of Russian liquidity at a layer of abstraction, in the same way that Abramovich, took away control of the club and gave it to a charity, I believe. This is a way of protecting yourself under the local law and avoiding censure. So this is, don't misread those steps. So the Magnitsky Act is the reason why Putin backed Trump. The Magnitsky Act was enacted by Obama in order to freeze Putin's assets all over the world and his proxies. That was the retaliation. So, people have to understand that we've been in a war, in the Third World War, in inverted commas, for a rather long time, actually, in the cyber world. And the misinformation campaigns and the disinformation campaigns and the exploitation of social media by affecting the perceptions of populations and informing those perceptions in order to be polarized and divided, enabled this win. As we talked about before, the algorithm was attacked and exploited in order to create the outcomes of the Brexit and the outcomes of the 2016 election. This is information war. And to Robert's point, I would welcome the conversation around tech trends. Yes, we could talk about hardware, drones, and ammo, and everything else. But the real war has been fought in information, in misinformation, disinformation. As always, propaganda was the key to Hitler's success in leveraging the radio and then the television to a lesser extent. But this is the war we're in. And what you're seeing is the revelation, the hard power is we talk about it in economics as the gloving of the invisible hand. And so everything, we talk about the singularity, everything is coherent when you're in a world of data. And so the war is going to be, really fought at the economic level. And this is where the oligarchs also come in. And you can see them sitting in safe places thinking, well, wouldn't it be bad if the boss actually got offed at some point, because then we can keep our money, we can say, we've got a scapegoat, it was this lunatic, and that's fueling the paranoia of Putin in his bunker. This is the late stage. So back to my question is, how far do we want to make sure that this man is removed by his own people, right, ideally, or by his own generals, or by his own greed? And then the West can go back to pretending like, those guys, that was okay, we'll give them a pass, and that's what that's one of the escape routes for the West, is get to those oligarchs, get to those, generals and say, your man's, gonna blow up all of the stuff that you sold your soul for.
Right.
Don't take that risk.
Yep.
Let's move him aside.
Hey, can I just put a point of information here on the Chelsea Football Club? The Daily Mail is reporting the charity so far has not accepted the stewardship of the club. And I think, first of all, from what I understand, they weren't even expecting this to happen. And I think one of the reasons they have not accepted the custodial, the custody of the club is I think they have some concern that maybe he's just doing this to park it with them and then we'll take it back after this thing is over. But they have refused to so far take control of
So
it from
there's
him.
a distinct
Can
reason. There's
I?
a distinct reason for that. So yes, you're absolutely right. Yes, it is a sham arrangement which the government and regulators can oversee. But more importantly, one has to look at the funding of the Conservative Party and their links. And their chairman, the chairman of their fundraising, is an individual who services the needs of that community. That is why I say, when the chairman of fundraising has those relationships, I suspect there will be conversations that will say, guys, exactly as I said before, maybe it's time to move on your dear leader.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Hello.
and
What's
just to let you know, there's a couple of oligarchs that have already come out and opposed the invasion of Ukraine. I've just tweeted an article out. The two top billionaire oligarchs have already started. And there's
um,
another article that multiple Russian oligarchs' children are speaking out against Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So the kids
Definitely.
are going to put
Can
pressure
you
on the parents.
please DM me those? And this is precisely where
please?
I want
Yeah.
I want to reveal that this is precisely where I'm focusing at the moment as well, because as Cal was saying, this phenomena of characteristically tough guys, and it's not just political tough guys. This happens in business rather frequently as well, where you get a megalomaniac type character who surrounds himself by yes men, and they become misinformed, and then based on that misinformation start driving the entire train off of a cliff. And that's when the rest of the people who've been held hostage as the yes men now have to make the decision to fly off the cliff with dear leader, or shoot him in the head to stop the train from going off the cliff. And we are at
Yeah, I
that.
just
We are at
yeah,
that
Let's
scene.
go.
That's the scene in the movie that we are now watching unfold. And as usual, you're going to start to see, and we are starting to see, little hints of the oligarchs acting in the moments where they start whispering to each other, who's going to pull the trigger, you or me. And this is a
Yeah,
classic.
And
The
then you get
Blatnevik
cut off
government
from the
school here in
command and
Oxford.
control structure when you're the
Yeah.
leader and
I just
people
sent this
don't
to
follow
you.
your orders. Sorry, I missed that. Sorry. Go
Can
ahead.
I
I was just
also
gonna add.
mention
Oh, sorry,
something from the
Yeah,
ground,
Demilare.
please?
hold on,
Yeah,
Cal's
sorry,
mom.
Demilare.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Demilare. Go ahead. I'll
Oh
speak.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about just the people on the ground and the civilians. I know probably you've already gone through it. I just wanted to give my little 2 cents on that. I have no clue about the oligarchs. I'm gonna have to do my own personal research on that when the time comes. But for now, I'm really trying to help with the civilians and helping civilians get past the border. There was some discrepancies within the border guards and getting Africans on the train. So I started to, not even in slight or anything like that, I started the Africans in Ukraine hashtag and tried to just get the news out there. And in midst of that, on the side, or should I say the main operation is to get whoever's at the border in Lviv and understand whether anyone is trapped in Samai and can't get any trains and probably has to walk. I know some people that were walking all weekend from Saturday to Sunday. So there's a lot of stories out there. So I have a thread that's pinned to my Twitter that you can see all of the videos and stories. I made sure that these videos are verified. This has nothing to do with like sowing hate or anything like that. I just wanted to get some civilians across the border and make sure that we're doing the right thing, being on this side, right? We're in safety, and this is what we can do for the people on the ground. and those people on the ground at some borders, Poland, out here Romania is a good border as well, but in Lviv were being somewhat mistreated, and just they're finding shelter and all of that stuff. But mainly why I'm in this chat is to just get the conversation around getting civilians out of Ukraine, right? Because they don't belong in there. There's women and children that I've seen that like actually seeing the visuals of this, of them being stuck in Ukraine and not being able to get past the border in like 3 degrees centigrade weather. So whoever is handy that has I've back channeled people that I knew on Twitter, but if anybody else knows someone that is on the right side of the border in Poland or Romania, Hungary or Slovakia, that please message me so that I can at least liaise like I can do from my position. So I'm trying to liaise and get the right people out of Ukraine.
Yeah, I just saw your Twitter feed, Demilara. Well done. It's just good leadership, really good leadership. You're basically, there's one place you can see at least, and looks like you're authenticating the videos and stuff. So, and you're acting and just leading. Yeah, just
Yeah,
impressed.
yes, some
Yeah,
people have tried to
yeah.
say that I'm a Russian spy and all of these other things, even though I've got a British accent. I wonder how that would work. But have saying
Oh, that
that
would work. Sorry.
Oh, you need
I'm
to
joking,
read
I'm
about
joking,
the Magnificent Five, Philibbean group.
but genuinely they like it's been like a massive storm, but I'm just trying to get civilians to the right side of the border, honestly. And yeah, like there's been a lot of hate around what I've done, but honestly there's people that are stuck in Ukraine that shouldn't be in Ukraine, and to me that's the end of it, honestly. And yeah, I'm trying my best to, not feed into any of that negativity, verify the information that I've got, and, post what is necessary so that these families, it's quite literally families, not just students, it's whole families, are at, a safe place. That's just the humanitarian stuff that I'm doing. And that, but honestly, yeah, I'm just trying to help.
I think it's awesome what you're doing. I would be very curious to know myself personally if you hear any stories of how people are being addressed if they're trying to go to Moldova from Ukraine, which is I haven't heard of people. People seem to be wanting to go to Poland or Romania, and I can understand that. That to me, that's a higher degree of difficulty because it's EU, and EU borders with non-EU countries like Ukraine are notoriously very tight because it's EU, non-EU. Moldova is not EU, and it shares a rather large border with Ukraine, which I personally have crossed, and that border didn't even really exist. You ride a train, and the immigration agents come on board the train while you're moving, and just look at your passport, and if it's all in order, then they allow you through. The train's in motion while the immigration's on the train. So I imagine that border might be far easier to cross because it's a non-EU border, and it gets you out of Ukraine into Chisinau, Moldova, where there's an airport where you can fly to safety, even if you don't feel safe in Chisinau, which that's
Yes, with that, I'm not as particular, and I hope you can understand my position. Like literally, anything I say can be used against me.
sure.
But what I understand is that you can get a plane from Poland,
Yep.
so you can actually go home via Poland, and
Yep.
that is what some people are trying to do. I'm not sure what the flights are from Moldova, so I can't verify any of that information. But people are literally just trying to get out to get home because the airports are obviously closed in Ukraine,
Yep.
and there's nothing above there. So the main news that people heard was you can get a plane from Poland, and this is what people do. Like we're gonna scramble to get to the place we know that we can fly out, and
Yeah.
that is what people did. They went to Lviv. Oh man, I'm getting emotional, but there's just a lot of people that are working hard to get home, basically.
Yes.
Honestly,
I'm just proposing, and it's just my nature to do so, to zig when everyone else is zagging. And my first instinct would be to go to Moldova, and I've done it myself personally before, and I'm saying that because I think most people they're overlooking that option. And
Can I say something?
as soon as I finish, and in Moldova is kind of neutral. It's slightly friendly to Russia. It's slightly friendly to the EU and Romania. It's very close to Romania. It's very friendly with Romania, and the government is not rather on amicable terms with Russia. So I don't think Russia's not going to be having any interest in going into Moldova, and it's just kind of this interesting. I would feel personally, I felt safe there when I was there, and so in that sense, if the objective is to get to safety, and I would personally, I could hang out in Moldova for a very long time myself personally, but I would, if you wanted to not go home and wait for things to cool down in a non-EU neighboring country of Ukraine, Moldova is your kind of your only option. But I would love to hear any firsthand accounts or experiences of people who've explored that option. Sorry, go ahead, Claire.
Yeah, I just came in. I was just going to listen. I just came in when you were talking about Moldova. But first, I wanted to say thanks, Dami, for what you've been doing. Have been, rallying along for the Africans in Ukraine, particularly because most of us who have been awake, I would say practically 72 hours on telegrams, mobilizing people. It's crazy. I'm getting a little bit emotional. But you mentioned Moldova, and it's quite difficult for three reasons. One, the consulars and embassies, for particularly here, and I don't want it to be used against me. Sorry. For three reasons. One is you need support from your country in order to move out. So you need to be close to a place you know you will get support. And that has been so far. You've had a lot of support in Poland. You have a lot of support in Romania. You have a lot of support in Hungary. You have a lot of support in Slovakia, because you are moving not just in small groups. You're moving with a lot of people. From what I've seen, you have groups of 10. The smallest group we've seen so far is maybe 3 people. But we're not advising people to move alone. We're not advising people to go to Moldavia. Please do not use this against me. But you will have the support you need if you go to the right places. The second reason is the Schengen area. It's not just about the consulars. We've seen states that are not helping its people. So you need normal people like you and me to support. And you have a lot of other Africans, you have a lot of Indians, you have a lot of people in Germany, in Austria, which is so much closer because you're in the Schengen area. You don't need to think of a visa. And also, you have to understand that it's not everyone who wants to immediately go to their home country. There are some students who've sacrificed their lives and they cannot imagine to go back. So they need to be in areas where normal people can support them if their own state is not supporting. And we've seen that with Ghanaians, with some Nigerians who have been stranded because they're alone in these small villages where nobody can reach them. So it's been normal families that are taking people in because it's masses. You have to think it's masses of people. And fine, fair enough, you go there. What do you do? So I would advise, if you know somebody who's stranded, tell them to join the Telegram groups, tell them to join Twitter. You have really masses, and I've never seen anything like this. You have masses of people that are supporting each other. And it's not just the NGOs, it's not just the state, it's normal people like you and me, which means you can do anything to make a difference. The little you do, the information that you're sharing is going to support. The third reason is, if you do need to fly out, you need to fly out immediately. Moldavia might not allow you to do that. So there are flights that are being arranged. There are even extra flights that are being added, especially in the areas that you need them. So that's why you don't find a lot of people, especially if you're not privileged, because that's what we've seen. If you're not light-skinned, if you're not considered the luxurious refugee, I don't know what you call that, then you're not treated as an equal. So you need to be in a place where, one, you're not alone. Two, you know you have support either from the NGO, from your state, or from other people. And three, where you can get out as soon as possible if that's what you want to do. At the end of the day, it's the decision of the people, and that's what we've been telling them. We're just there to spread the information. We're asking them to share videos as much as possible if they want to, if they can, so that we validate it, like what Davi has been doing. And I advise you, if you can just do the little share the information, proof check it, please do that. That's it, and I have to step out. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank
So
you so much, Claire. Honestly, yeah, it's just normal people, and yeah, we're mobilizing, and I'm happy about that. The telegrams are there, the threads are there, and this is what we're doing for the people on the ground. Honestly, but back to you, Tyler. Sorry about that.
okay. So we opened the room an hour ago on this topic, and then we went away from it, and then it's clearly on the top of many people's minds. Letitia in the audience just sent me a really cool map of the diaspora, for lack of a better word, of people in Ukraine leaving Ukraine and where they're going by the numbers. And there's been 367,893 thus far, according to AFP, and 263 to Belarus, which is relatively none. That's kind of interesting. The vast majority, nearly everyone's going to Poland, 156,000. Only a tenth of them are going to Slovakia, which is 17,000. About half of half the size of Poland's going, 71,000 going to Hungary, 43,000 going to Romania, and 41,000 to Moldova. And the unique thing about Moldova, again, is it's the one that's not in the EU, which I imagine is going to make it. By the way, those numbers is for everybody leaving Ukraine. I imagine for people that don't have Ukrainian passports, and that would include people of color, I think Moldova is likely to be I would love to confirm this. I would really like to know this. If there's any friction going into Moldova for people of color, I would love to know that, because if there's no friction there, let's get the word out to Damilaire and Claire and the networks that they're on and Telegram and everything else to let them know, because it could be that and it seems it is, that the Poland is, cherry picking to some for whatever reasons, and I'm not gonna. That would take forever to play. We don't have all the wherewithal to make that judgment call at the moment. But I'm not interested in making the judgment call. I'm interested in people getting to safety, and that if people can get to safety in Moldova and that they're being accepted there, that would be fantastic. I hope that's the case, and I hope if it is the case that the word of that get out, because it's not intuitive. It's not. Clearly, the data shows that's aren't where it's where the minority of people are going. But I would love to know what the experience has been for the people of color who have tried to go there already. I think that could be worth investigating. So the article that's pinned to the top of the room represents kind of the second topic of the day, which we didn't really dive into properly. That was raised by remind me who raised this.
Robert
did? Yeah, thanks. And it was about the tech angle, and the article at the top of the room really does a very nice job of covering a lot of the tech points of what's happening. And I can blaze through all of them very quickly. It says internet becoming the battleground. It says social media platforms are beginning to crack down on Russian state media in response to the Kremlin's efforts to tighten controls around internet communication. So you're seeing now the American social media companies battling with Russian state propaganda, essentially. Tech giants that provide services.
And you'll note that it's the former Deputy Prime Minister who is now the head of global affairs for Meta, who is, politics has come in this singularity now with social media.
Nick Clegg is who Nicholas is referring to in the UK, who used to be the Deputy Prime Minister of the UK, is now head of President of Global Affairs at Facebook. And this guy knows politics better than anyone in tech, ostensibly. So Google said late Saturday that it's pausing monetization of Russian state-funded media across Google platforms. By the way, in a separate article I just read, Google is stopping all real-time traffic data inside Ukraine, because in Google Maps you can see where people are gathered in real time. So that, of course, can be weaponized and utilized by Russia to know where people are in mass. And so Google has turned that off so that the Russians ostensibly won't know that everyone's hiding out in the bottom of a subway, for example, because Android data does that anonymized, mass data reporting on Google Maps of where people are in real time. Now, as Google's turned that
Tyler,
off.
can that sorry,
Yeah.
Tyler, can that be reversed? Can that be hacked into getting the information through Google, even if it's turned
If
off?
Google turns it off, it'll be difficult to get through to that data. Not impossible, but very, very difficult. What I thought you were going to ask is, could the opposite happen? Could Google provide the location data of Russians in Ukraine, meaning non-Ukrainian phone numbers or Russian accounts who happen to be in Ukraine? Could they?
Tinder is doing that. Tinder
You
and
better
Grindr.
believe it.
So, basically, what happened is that all those Ukrainian women saw a flurry of profiles on their Tinder profile in last couple of days.
Correct.
And then the Russian soldiers also started swiping right, and then they started sharing their location.
Right.
So that's a way Russian soldiers are also being honey trapped and being tracked.
What Armish is referring to is Russian soldiers who, again, don't really think they're in a war, because from Russia's perspective, this isn't a war. This is a bear hug of trying to convince a cousin to join the family picnic and the Christmas dinner. So they're active on Tinder. The Russian military members are active on Tinder because they like Ukrainian women. And what's happening is the Ukrainian women are using those male instincts against them.
That is the most hysterical thing I've heard today.
The ultimate honeypot.
Yes, it's called a honeypot. And by the way, in the history of international conflicts, that one is about as old as time. That goes back to the Babylonians. So, they are trying to get location status of Russian troops. The Ukrainian women are. And apparently they are being successful in doing that. And that is indeed one of the interesting tech elements of this, just the modern version of it. Because I said that whole scenario of women playing an important role in intelligence gathering is as old as time. So,
and you'll note the irony that it was John Podesta who was fished that enabled the Russians to hack the Democrats ahead of the 2016 and create the WikiLeaks of the Democrat information. And similarly, you'll note that the messages that were being exchanged in drafts on Gmail, which is entirely read and scanned, as we know, by Google. So these are, again, more gloving of the invisible hand of technology as it coheres with politics and information is the substrate that controls the world. And the Russians, you'll remember, also had a massive hack into the entire undetected into the entire infrastructure of the US government that was a major issue that people generally overlooked. I don't know if someone's more versed on that.
Yeah, Nicholas, that was actually from, believe it or not, it was actually from the undisclosed LinkedIn breach that happened, where it all started off, and that was back in 2014. And it also goes to show the importance of constantly changing your password. He had the same password for several different sites, and that's something we've always told people. In times of conflict right now, you probably want to check that out, because there's also been major auto manufacturer hacked, NVIDIA hacked. So you have to ask yourself, why NVIDIA? Okay, NVIDIA probably because of the Bitcoining market and them using that for mining Bitcoin. Okay, the automobile manufacturer could be, hey, they provide military vehicles, so we're going to target that. So a lot of people that are careless with their passwords, you'd be shocked. And I always tell people, go to Have I Been Pwned, and be shocked how many breaches you've been in.
But may I say something? I mean, if the Russia government try to hack into the Google service, on the other hand, we all know in China or even in Korea, they have their own map, like the Google map, Naver and Baidu map. So since we know now China and Russia are like a bro thing, maybe in the long term, not in the quick term, of course, they try to employ the China system of mapping. Then in the future, there's decoupling from the Google service, maybe a direction for them. That's my suspension. Yeah.
I don't think Russia and China is that friendly for Russia to choose China database.
Yeah, for data safety, maybe not a choice, but like borrow the system to some degree. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to thank the person who just DM'd me a link from Reason.com about Moldova's president comments about people coming from Ukraine. They said that over 4,000 Ukrainians have already crossed into Moldova today, and that the country's border, quote, the borders are open for citizens. It's assumed. It just says borders are open for, quote, brackets, Ukrainian citizens, meaning the person didn't actually say that, but the journalist is including the word. Well, this is an incredibly important distinction. Borders are open for brackets, Ukrainian citizens who need safe transit or stay. Moldova is preparing to help fleeing Ukrainians in their humanitarian need. She expressed, the president is female. Much like Ukraine, Moldova gained independence from Soviet Union, blah, 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 blah. Well, this is why I want to know, are you welcoming non-Ukrainians as well? It's an incredibly important question at the moment. So back to the article of all of the interesting technical issues that are unfolding at the moment with the social media. Twitter said on Friday that it's temporarily pausing advertisements in Ukraine to ensure critical public safety information is elevated. They're basically trying to, Facebook and Twitter and YouTube are all trying to stop Russian propaganda and misinformation from reaching Ukraine in a very intense way, in an unprecedented way. And Twitter has been restricted in Russia in the same way that Russia is trying to use Twitter to spread misinformation in Ukraine. They're also trying to stop Twitter in Russia.
And they demonetize them as well on all those sites.
But notice the importance here. Russia is essentially stopping Twitter and Facebook from operating in Russia, and at the same time, they're trying to use it to spread misinformation in Ukraine. And YouTube is shutting down that effort in Ukraine, and Russia is now demanding that YouTube reopen their state media accounts on YouTube so that they can share their information to be broadcast in Ukraine.
Tyler?
Yes.
It's MA. Happy Monday.
You too.
This is really interesting. At 7, early this morning when I was in Pietr's room, I reported that, like, I think they had an 11:36 p.m. meeting last night in the EU emergency meeting, and Ursula von der Leyen, or I can't pronounce her name, I think she might be Belgian Dutch, but Ursula stated that one of the pieces that they updated in the afternoon is that they are absolutely going to fast track apps to prevent misinformation and false reporting. They said that the EU is going to do that they're definitely going to be fast tracking applications to basically move that and protect from that false information coming out, which is interesting as well, because the 3 top seats that are held, as we know, are Germany, France, and Netherlands. And Netherlands did offer their cybersecurity support to the Ukraine. So it's not unheard of that I would probably say that Netherlands is probably, their intelligence is heavy involved in terms of cybersecurity to support that effort, because they hold one of the top seats in the EU.
Never let a good crisis go to waste if you want to restrict free speech. And so they're officially now going to regulate free speech.
Back to there's a whole bunch more things happening on the tech front. Russia state media has quietly become a target for hackers seeking to show support for Ukraine. On Friday, hackers from Anonymous said they were responsible for web outages of RT.com and Russian government websites, and they're forcing Russian state media websites to play the national anthem of Ukraine, for example. Apparently there were some bank websites Russian bank websites were taken down by Anonymous as well, I'm hearing. And on Friday, Ukraine officials have been publicly urging social platforms to take down Russian state accounts. The head of Ukraine also the Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine wrote a letter to Apple Tim Cook asking him to block access to Apple's App Store for citizens in Russia. And that speaks to we're baby stepping into what I said was the ultimate nuclear bomb in the cyber war, which we've never been in one really, but we apparently might be on the brink of one. So it's worth contemplating what is the real worst case scenario in a cyber war. And I'm predicting it is that America, if things really escalate, as they naturally have a tendency to do in conflicts of this sort, that America's nuclear bomb in the cyber war is telling Tim Cook and Sundar Pichai, the head of Microsoft and Apple and Microsoft, to stop all data transmissions to and from their platforms, meaning Android and Apple and Microsoft, which would render all devices in Russia utterly useless instantly, which if that doesn't create a revolution in 6 hours, I don't know what would. I think that would cause
Tyler?
mass pandemonium.
Tyler.
Yeah.
So wouldn't that also be a problem for assets on the ground then? So if you have human intelligence assets on the ground, that would also be problematic for them if they were to do that. Because not all things can be done cyber. There still needs the human for validation.
Right. Could they do it on an account country creation basis? I mean, you could do it by IP address, perhaps, or you could do it by where is the account registered? Is there
each device has a unique ID? Each device has a unique ID.
IMEI number, you can pin the
right.
device with it.
It's difficult because some people, I bought my iPhone is from Hong Kong, for example, and my
the device still has a unique ID. Even so,
you can register with that number, so the agent they used, the device they used can be registered and be tracked.
That might cause more harm to the people than the actual government, because last time Putin kind of came across the Snowden revelations, the Russian government changed the way they do internal communication. In fact, they said they went back to the typewriter as a matter of security, so it's kind of a funny situation to consider.
Exactly.
Tyler, on the weekend, Senator Mark Warner said something quite jaw-dropping. We've been at war, in the cyber context, for well over a decade, right? But there's been no clear delineation of what kind of action in the cyber context could have a reflection in the physical context. But Senator Mark Warner, on one of the NBC weekend political news programs, he said that if anything from Russia that can affect life in Poland, that in terms of a cyber a cyber threat that gets on a hospital or something like that, if that were to occur to anybody who lives in NATO, that could come back and trigger NATO's engagement, and that would be the first time where the cyber theater comes over to the physical theater to actually, like he said verbatim, trigger NATO involvement in the Ukraine thing.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So, David, you can do direct targeting on a single individual from a cyber concept. So, for instance, you had a pacemaker and you made a comment on your doctor's website, your cardiologist. He's the one that manages. The only way to manage that pacemaker is through a laptop he may have. All I have to do is compromise that. It's going to have your profile on that, and I can make changes to that configuration. That's the simplicity of some of that stuff. That's why when Dick Cheney heard about this stuff years ago, he got fearful. Has it changed? No. I mean, it's still a complex situation. Now, that's a singular target. Now, if you're targeting a hospital, all you have to do is target the power. Power can only last so long, or other operational machines. And this has been a huge initiative across. But like everything in the healthcare space, that stuff takes time. I mean, I can hack your car. You would never know because there's no forensics tool that's going to detect it. and all it takes is a little $40 plug-in into the admin dashboard of your car.
Just look at the Colonial Pipeline.
Okay.
And I just want to put the pin on that I'd like to just put on there. IoT's been just a green field for cyber attacks, right? But a U.S. senator, speaking very specifically that they are looking at a specific red line in the cyber context is I guess is the point. But yeah, thank you, Tom.
So
There are 14 sites that were identified as acts of war if they were attacked. So you can just look them up, which ones would be considered for America red line acts of war.
So NBC News is reporting, and this is the biggest tech story of the day, by the way. We're going to go through the big tech stories, but many of them are about Ukraine. But all the big ones are about Ukraine, believe it or not. And the first one is from NBC News that Facebook and Twitter have removed 2 anti-Ukraine covert influence operations over the weekend, one tied to Russia and the other to Belarus, which is very much Russia as well. And I'm speaking as somebody who's built a startup from Russian developers based in Minsk, Belarus. Facebook and Twitter removed 2 anti-Ukrainian covert influence operations over the weekend, one tied to Russia, the other with connections to Belarus.
So it's going to make it very hard to argue that they're not publishers in under Section 230 if we go to the meta point of that. All these things I think we should see as indicators that make revelations about policy.
Exactly.
But if it's under government, under government orders, is that still the against the law there? I mean, the treaty.
So Associated Press article says how Russia is trying to use social media platforms to stir up anti-Ukraine sentiment by spreading propaganda, disinformation, and discord online. The Russian TikTok video has it all: a cat, puppies, and pulsing background beat. It's cute, watchable, and hardly seems the stuff of state propaganda. Armies of trolls and bots stir up anti-Ukrainian sentiment. State-controlled media outlets look to divide Western audiences. Clever TikTok videos serve up Russian nationalism with a side of humor. And there's a quote, "It could just be patriotic Russian fighting the good fight as they see it, or it could be easily something directly affiliated with the state," says disinformation researcher and expert on Eastern Europe at the Wilson Center in Washington. Russia has been perfecting these tactics. Okay, and that's from AP. And then another article says Russia's leading internet providers have restricted access to Twitter and Facebook, as I had said, because they believe Facebook and Twitter are spreading misinformation in Russia, and they don't want their people being exposed to that. But at the same time, they're demanding YouTube turn on their ability to spread information in Ukraine, for example. Carl, you are DMing me some very interesting points about cyber vulnerabilities, for example.
Yeah, sorry for hammering you. We moved on a little bit, but a point I wanted to make earlier when we were talking about cybersecurity and whatnot is that it is the state of things, and I think Nicholas, you'll probably have a counterpoint on this or an agreement with this, that in the US and in the UK, something like 70-80% of the utilities, so the gas, the water, the electricity, the telecoms and everything, is privately owned. And those private companies aren't under, I apologize for my dog, those private companies aren't under state legislation to enforce cybersecurity. A lot of them are running on very old versions of Windows, for instance, that are extremely insecure, with C-level executives who don't understand what MFA is and don't adhere to proper security practices. And this is running this is the backbone of the US and in the UK.
But Tyler, I have personal respect for whosoever is running the Ukrainian PsyOps war. I think he's the god of internet trolls, and it is out of respect, by the way, because compared to Ukrainians have beaten Russia in information war for initial 3 days. The whole Snake Island and the ghost of Kiev, and he is a guy to be respected. Whosoever is coordinating it, I think at least Ukrainian have beaten Russians in the information war by far.
You bring up an interesting point, which is I have a really unique scenario on my hands here in real life. At my private residence, I happen to have a guest a couple who's from Russia who've been with me for more than a month. I also have a Ukrainian couple who just arrived now 3 days ago, directly from Kiev. They literally got one of the last flights out. He's in his late 20s. He was literally perhaps he might be one of the very last service age Ukrainian men who left Ukraine and came directly to my place. And I have them both here simultaneously. What's interesting is, what was the Jesus? Oh, the both of them, we eat together here in my place, and the Russian gentleman made the point that this, in the early stages of things, is still very much a war of media, as he said, as he called it, and he has a very valid point that the how the world decides how they feel about what's happening in large part will be dictated by who has the better storytelling, narrative, PR, wizardry, what have you. And this is something that has been well understood for a very long time. And some countries are better at it than others. Other countries have reputations for this. And you can fill in the blanks on which countries have their. Anyway.
So Tyler, just to interject, to ask, just to clarify a point there. So,
yeah.
From the perspective of just zooming out and saying, did Putin ever think, really, and why would he have reason to think that he would not be regarded as an invading force,
right,
and therefore be, pariahed
right,
by the rest of the world? I mean, in the calculus, it's pretty basic, right? It's like, how am I going to spin this? There's no way you could win a media war, because this is the might of right versus the right of might, and that that is the case. So where are we misobserving this? Because he must have known that this would not be popular, or he must have thought, and there must be a giant miscalculation there, that he thought that people would somehow give him a pass like they did in 2014 with the Crimea.
Robert?
So,
yeah, Nicholas, are you done? I don't want to interrupt you.
Well, Tyler wasn't done.
No,
I know. I was just interjecting for clarity on Tyler's point.
I'm happy to always hand the mic to Robert if he unmiked as he just did. Go ahead, Robert.
Thank you. Couple of things. I'm glad you're going down this road, but let's be clear. There are people who think might is right. I get everybody here, or not everybody, a lot of people here have intentions or belief that everything's for the greater good, but there are views of other greater goods out there. So let's understand humankind pursues what humankind pursues. But anyway, last time I was in Ukraine was back in 2012. And there were protests then relating to, I think they were trying to suppress the Russian language and prioritize the Ukrainian language. And I have some, I don't know, my photos weren't that great, but of some of the protests that were going on in some of the plazas over there. Beautiful place. But I think we need to look. I'm glad we're on this tech topic, because it's very interesting, because I'm wondering where next. And this is just a dress rehearsal, guys. This is a dress rehearsal.
Yeah.
So the question
Robert,
is, what next?
can I ask you, Robert, just
yes.
how does it relate to, because I want to try and keep a thread, because I appreciate the generosity of Tyler to kind of move on the topic there. But then Tyler was onto a point, right? That was that Nicholas then came and added to and worked that through. But how does that relate? Is the tech going to help with the question that why did Putin miscalculate this very obvious thing, right? Was it technology around him or something? Or is it a different point? I just want to make sure that we keep
the
some
only
level
point
of
that
analysis.
and I'll drop off after this. My only point was the belief that everything is around the greater good is wrong, and that there is money and everything to be made and tech to push what we believe as a greater good. But I'll just leave it at that.
Hey, Cal, this is
Be
Ken.
agreeing or
I could
disagreeing,
actually
Robert?
maybe answer Nicholas's question if that was
Go ahead.
allowed. Here. Okay. I have this is my own theory on why Putin miscalculated or where how he sees it, or is that he looked at what happened with Crimea. He looked at what happened with his incursion in Georgia. So I think that played a role. I think the way that we left Afghanistan probably played a role. I think there's a lot of things that played a role in his calculation. And by the way, I mean, just to show you that there are other points of view, I saw Glenn Greenwald on Bill Maher's show, and Glenn Greenwald, even though he claims he was not taking a position, even though kind of I guess he was trying to make the point. His point was the United States has invaded countries, in the past, and there's, sometimes controversially. Certainly, the second Iraq War was controversial in the international community. So maybe Putin thought, hey, I could always argue the U.S. has done this for this or that. They've come up with their justifications, so I'll come up with my justifications. So I think Putin was probably thinking along those lines. That would be my view on that. And I'm done speaking.
I think there's one point which we are missing. Putin knew that NATO and US might not be able to come and in active fight. So he wanted to spin that narrative. So he expected that when these guys would not come to Ukraine, we'd spin the narrative that, okay, these are the guys you wanted to join. Look at, they are not coming at your help. And he was hoping that if he wasn't expecting that sort of resistance. And he was hoping that he would, with his initial appeal on to military and locals would work and people would not fight, come on street. And he also underestimated Zelensky. He just wanted Zelensky's head on plate, and the Russian narrative of how NATO and US did not come to your help. So that was they initially tried to push, but that just backfired. I think Putin is reasonably smart, but I think what he did not estimate it is that his guys, Russian guys, PSYOPs guys, are not that great compared to Ukrainian and the collective. So that just backfired, the whole information war, and not able to convince. And I think the more it goes, so he wanted to wrap up this in just initial 2 days, and that's where it got miscalculated.
So go ahead, Carl, but I want to raise the huge elephant in the room that I've not heard anybody discuss, which is the Western response in support of Ukraine. You have the Brandenburg Gate. You have monuments around the world lit up in Ukraine colors, and you have very, very large outpourings across Europe and other places. Today, Berlin, many places in the U.S., many places around Europe, very, 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 very large outpourings. Amsterdam has one, as May can attest. Bern, Switzerland, for example, very large, tens of thousands of citizens going into their public squares, waving Ukraine flags. That is not that. And what's interesting about that is that didn't happen with, we could name, and people are naming on Twitter, countless other invasions by forces. And Glenn and others even point out the instances when Americans, go into countries where they're not exactly going in with the best of intentions. But the point is the uniqueness of the support that Ukraine is witnessing is somewhat unparalleled. I'm trying to remember the last time a country that was being invaded received this much support, right? And obviously the social media plays into this, and the winning of the media war, and this is back to Armish's point, is whoever's handling the social media for Ukraine deserves the social media award of 2022, because part of what people are responding to is exactly as he just said, was that Snake Island viral video, the Ghost of Kiev meme, and others like it. There's some true brilliant meme generation going on, and I'm in no way implying that the support for Ukraine isn't well deserved. I'm just want to raise the awareness that this is rather unprecedented and it's kind of unique, and and no doubt countries are taking notes about this and how to leverage it to their advantage should they ever find themselves on either end of a hot conflict. No doubt, it's a real
Tyler, what's interesting is
Wait,
that the whole US and CIA got 2 out of 2 wrong. So they thought in Afghanistan, they thought Ghani would stay and fight, and he fled. But in Zelensky's case, they thought, okay, Zelensky's would go, would not be able to fight. So Russia would be able to take over. So let's not go into the fight. So if you notice, Germany and all the Stinger missiles, they have started pouring in only when the resistance became strong. So it looks like from a neutral, okay, these guys were just observing for the initial couple of days, and US and of course Germany in the West, how they are going to perform. And they started doing well. Okay, let's start ammunitions, and so that's how it's being played out. And I think it is the credit to Zelensky is also that he did not fled. Of course, all of his military attires, the pictures you see, they were all shot in November, by the way, when he was visiting those outposts. None of it is from recent.
Thank you, Armish.
I think Alexandra wants to speak.
I just have news. Can I just give you breaking news that just happened? And I tweeted it to you also, but in terms of this like unprecedented nature, is the first Switzerland is freezing Russian assets. That's huge. That's not neutral. So ordinarily they were the bastion of places to rest, and all they did was protect their own territory. But they're freezing the assets. The other thing is Germany is breaking its post-war tradition of no military.
Matrix.
You're breaking out, Alexandra.
Sorry, I'm driving my daughter to school. You can hear, but space is offering military aid.
Still in the Matrix.
We'll come back to Alexandra. By the way, Switzerland making this decision to not maintain neutrality as is part of their national identity, so this is quite unprecedented, or it's counter to their national identity. Let's put it that way. So it's not trivial. Let me put it that way. They did just have a major protest of citizens in the town squares in Bern, very specifically, which was caught on social media. And I have to imagine that when you have your town squares full of citizens chanting, that does put some pressure on the decision makers. I have to assume that there was those two dots connect in some fashion. Similarly, Sweden, who also has a bit of a national identity of kind of not taking sides, let's put it that way, is also taking sides and sending arms to the Ukrainians. So, and Finland as well is taking sides. This is collectively very unprecedented when you have Switzerland and Sweden, who both are a bit known for their abstaining in these types of situations, are both picking sides. That's back to the main point, which is the level of support that the Ukrainians are receiving. Again, I'm not making a judgment.
I think it's amazing, the Switzerland point, and I wonder if the World Economic Forum in May, they disinvite, which I don't know if Klaus Schwab is going to do that, but because he's basically, Swiss, right? And in a sense, part of the, what does Nicholas call it? The invisible glove. Maybe he's part of that. But that's very, very interesting. Switzerland, that's new. That's good. That's interesting news.
I think
Tyler, wait, can you hear me now or not? Is it better?
Yes, better.
Oh, good. So not only that, Germany is supplying weapons and military aid, which they haven't done since World War II. They have a ban on it. And then NATO can't support the Ukraine formally because they're not a member, but the EU is, which is it's an economic union, and they're providing military support. They're preventing the Russian planes from flying over EU airspace. I mean, none of this has happened before. Thank you. This was not even the intention of any of these things, but that's what they're doing. They said, well, the EU can join, and so we're going to prevent this. And very likely they justified it with the statement that if the Russia if successfully invades the Ukraine, then the EU is at risk. So but they can actually ask for military support from a lot of people that the Ukraine can't. So it's kind of incredible everything that's happening now. Not just Switzerland, but also these other countries that are breaking traditions that some of them are hundreds and hundreds of years old, and they're all doing this to support Ukraine and their own interests as well. But it's pretty incredible. How much is being done. The airspace thing hasn't been done by the EU itself. Like just the EU saying no, you can't fly over our airspace without the countries involved being at war with other countries or having some level of military risk directly. So it's incredible.
Tyler, can I follow up on that and just kind of, last week I was like everybody saying, wow, we're at the precipice of the new world order, but I want to replace the word "the" with the struggling to emerge new perspective, possible new world order. We know that Russia has a lot more militarily that's going to start to show its ugly face. But at the same time, Russia has struggled militarily mightily against a very sharpened Ukrainian army. But with regards to all of this other unity around the world in all the different ways that people are speaking to, that's all unprecedented. And I guess what I'd like to put a little button on, trying to find the right words to kind of put it, which is the world is starting to unite, the democracies, however you want to collectively call them, to basically take it back to Putin. And I would add to that, prospectively, possibly other authoritarian regimes who will be attacking democracy. And that's saying something without saying something kind of statement, because as this unfolds, we'll have to see if that kind of support can, in this context of unity, can continue in this strong way as other actors possibly consider other similar types of things that Putin's doing.
David, I would
Yeah.
suspect that will not happen if it wasn't on Europe. So we'll see if this when time moves forward. If there's issues with anti-democratic actions or something similar that happens in Africa, if it happens somewhere else, we'll see what the European countries do. I think Nicholas hit the thing on the head before, that basically all these countries, you're seeing all this stuff from Switzerland, Sweden, whatever, because they're scared. They think they could be next. So this is all about their own self-interest, not about some higher moral. This is cause. They all think that they could be next. They're scared that if Russia is able to take Ukraine, what else can he take? What Putin can take. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. And I'm done speaking.
I
I
think
don't.
one thing I'm gonna put a little bit contrarian to that one is Canada also has closed its airspace to all Russian carriers. I think they mentioned it this morning or last night. So, and Canada is way, way far out from I think
Yeah,
Ukraine,
but Messi,
Russia.
Canada's always been courageous. Canada has supported. No, no, seriously, they have
Yeah.
supported a lot of these causes when they've never been attacked. You can go back to World War II. Canada or Australia, they're kind of unique that like that. But we're talking about like the Germans and the Swiss and Sweden that haven't always stood with the West, depending on what they thought their own interests were. Canada generally has always stood with the West, so that's a different element. Yeah.
Except for that one time when the prime minister stood on that Russian submarine and gave a middle finger to the U.S. Navy. So that was Trudeau Senior. So other than that, yeah, I'd agree with you, Ken.
And I would
Well,
like
I
to,
would
I'd like
say
to,
two quick money things, just two quick news money things. One is the ruble is now valued less than 1 US cent. And the second thing is apparently some major banks or Russian banks are being deplatformed from SWIFT. I don't know if you discussed that already.
Yeah, I want to get into that.
Yeah, we do.
That was yesterday.
I think
But
they just
I
added
will
3
say
more
this:
banks in the
Europe
UK.
has not.
Go ahead, Francine.
Hello?
Yeah.
I'm old, and I want to say that in all the time I've lived, since the end of the Second World War, Europe has never been so threatened by the thought of somebody with an on the ground army marching through it. And that's why you're seeing this sort of coordinated response. Europe has a tremendous sense of history, and all the people there are thinking about what happened during World War One and World War Two, and how they need to somehow get ahead of it, so to speak, before it tramples them.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight the interesting reactions different politics are having. Uh, I mean, there's countless. A lot of places now not selling Russian vodka. I mean, bars across America are now selling Ukrainian vodkas and not Russian vodkas, as an example. And celebrities in sports of all type are disengaging from playing Russian opponents. Sweden, by the way, has a major sporting event of hundreds of people. It's a major skiing event, cross-country skiing event, and it's very well known. It's a big annual. It's kind of like the Boston Marathon of Scandinavia, and they're no longer allowing Russians to participate. To give you an example of this, again, these are countless interesting social, cultural restrictions that the world is dogpiling on Russia. There's very interesting trade things happening where in ports around the world, refueling tankers are refusing to refuel Russian tankers.
This is why China wants to have their
Did you
own
mention the
ports with their own investments in fueling capabilities.
Yes,
did
Chris,
did you mention the IOC's announcement?
go ahead.
The International Olympic Committee has
Yep.
recommended that every international sport competition ban all Russian and Belarusian athletes.
And not for like the final medal skating, and just like, yeah, well, we can let you do with drugs too, but not officially, but kind of unofficially. So that's extra intense.
It's Russia and Belarus, right?
Yeah, that's both.
Yes.
And also FIFA also is banning Russia, I think, from the FIFA World Cup that's coming up this
It
summer.
it's hard to imagine how, with all the Gen Zs that are highly connected in Russia, that all of these events are not permeating, through the attempts to ban it.
Well, it depends on how heavy their domestic propaganda is and spending things and how effective that is. I mean, Russian propaganda is something they've spent decades perfecting, so it's a question how effective it is domestic.
But I must say that the protests in Tokyo, the Russians are joining Ukraine to protest because they say that they don't stand by their leaders in the invasion.
That's internationally. Russians outside of Russia seem to be united in that, and even many Russian celebrities and oligarchs' children. Many are speaking out on a. There was a poll done.
Actually, Tyler, I have a couple of
Tyler, there
Russian
were
friends.
Jesus Christ,
Can
people
I
in the
ask
middle of a
some?
sentence making a point. There's a poll done domestically in Russia that a significant percent of them believe that the conflict with Ukraine is fundamentally based on Ukrainian aggression, that they are addressing. They aren't, that Russia doesn't see itself as the instigator of the aggression, that they are the responder to the initial act of aggression. So that's this narrative, and why you can have, and this should be the subject of some college classes on, the power of media, and especially when it relates to conflicts, is you have a population who, when polled, believe that their actions are justified because of the narrative that they're receiving. And similarly, there's narrative. We just spoke about the headlines of Facebook and Twitter and YouTube banning Russian narratives outside of Russia, and Russia demanding that YouTube turn on the Russian state media accounts so that their narrative can be heard outside of Russia, because they want to tell their side of the story. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. We're not hearing their narrative at all about about Nazis running Ukraine. Yeah, that's
Doesn't
what
Kremlin
they.
have a
Can I?
partial ownership stake in Facebook, like through some of the investment stuff with the
Yeah,
LPs, the VCs that
DST.
own that? Like,
Yes, you're right. DST is Yuri Milner, who's the right hand of Vladimir Putin, who invested a substantial sum in Facebook. However, did not get any board seat with that major investment. It was a very substantial investment in the early days of Facebook. And when asked a few years later, many years ago, to Yuri Milner, why didn't you demand a board seat? You easily could have got one with the size of the investment that you did. He says his response was that there's other ways of influencing than from a board seat. So
they also have more shares with Russian-backed investors in Facebook than is publicly done as a thing. A lot of early employees, when they wanted to liquidate their shares or convert them with their RSUs so they could get payouts, part of the clauses in the contract they signed limited who they could sell to, and it was all these Russian-backed groups or things. So this was months ago that we were tracing some of these threads, but what's interesting here is when you're talking, Tyler, about the Russians being able to influence the theme of which narratives are being portrayed. A lot of these new transformational tech channels that were supposed to be these new ideas and ways of spreading information, it's shocking how much these start to resemble old forms of, which group is broadcasting this form of propaganda, which one's broadcasting that one. Originally, these new platforms were supposed to be more secure against this sort of thing, but it seems almost like they're more vulnerable. The narrative of neo Nazis taking over Ukraine and aggression against Russia, there is a very, very, very tiny seed of truth for that. But the problem is that it, by this point, it has been so warped by the propaganda part, and it's very different from the sort of nation on nation state aggression that you see right here. And that sort of nuance is going to get completely lost in these sorts of discussions. It's very unfortunate because the historical part of this is fascinating, but when you live in interesting
Can I?
times, you don't always get to pick the battleground.
Can I add something?
Tyler.
Because this conversation has been important to me within the past like 6 months now, which is how well do we know that the majority of Russians, because that's a narrative that's been portrayed, and I wonder what, and I'm not even trying to like sow discontent or anything like that. I just want to know like what really is the numbers as to people dislike Russia. I understand Russians outside of Russia don't have a very good vision of Russia, but the way media has been portraying Russians for the past 60 years, as well as what we've been inundated with it within information and stuff like that for the past 40 years, I understand how some people can be colored in their view of Russian citizens. However, just within like the confines of just Russians being in Russia, how many of them know what is actually going on, and are they really against Putin? Because, and even if they knew exactly what's going on, are the people that know exactly what's going on, are they really against this? Because I see the thing when it comes to the people that stormed the Capitol, as well as what happened with Brexit and the riots there, the counter riots to Black Lives Matter. I understand that there's people within the constituencies that are for these type of battles, and I don't know whether that's been talked about enough. And how um, Russians are basically victims of Putin just as well, when we don't necessarily know that as a cold hard fact, as I believe it's 400 million people in Russia. So yeah, I just wanted to know like what is that conversation like.
I
It's
wouldn't trust
Part
public polling
just
on this one specifically because historically, Gallup polling and others were formed, during the pre and post World War II type kind of era. A lot of it was the way the game works is that you build up public trust with more insignificant things like health and nutrition, etc. And when you look at the ownership structures of these polling groups, a lot of them have espionage agencies and state-based actors operating just nearby. So the way is you build up public trust on things that are not terribly significant of issue or import or things you can take acceptable losses on. But then when there is a state-backed issue that you need to really push that propaganda heavy on, that's when the polls start getting torqued in one way or another. You saw this with the Iraq invasion. You saw this with versions of the entire public supports X, Y, or Z. When you have a nation state going to flex. This is one of the ways that you can flex. So any public polling coming out of Russia or USA, I would say put some heavy, heavy skepticism on any of those things coming out, because this is the time we pull in those favors.
So Carnegie Endowment has been doing a series of these investigations with local people, like all over. And their major publications came out 2012, 2014. There was another 2018. I don't know if there's a 2016, just to discuss the impact of actions of Russia on Russians. And I think it was a Demilar. Somebody mentioned earlier that there was this very narrow the group of people who are protesting, but the protests are actually they're extremely like well centered. Like there's a majority of people in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and of 25 to 34-year olds, you've got over 60% of people who disagree with Russia. And there's a whole bunch of other statistics. I held a room on all of this kind of data. But the rest of the population mostly believes that Russia is in the right. Like they believe that the 2014 action in Sevastopol, where they broke into that Navy engineering room, they think that that was mostly because of NATO and the West and America. There's like 4% that believe that Russia was the instigator of that action, where they went onto Ukraine territory and did that. So the percentage here of apparently from early numbers is something like it's under 16% overall. But again, that varies based on where the person is and what their age group is. The older the population, the more likely they are to believe that it is Russian, Russia's in the right. I don't know whether or not it is necessarily about the information they're getting, because theoretically everyone is getting access to the same information, or their likelihood to believe it or critically analyze it. And again, in the US, we have that same problem. It's not access to information that's the problem. It's the ability to appropriately analyze it for slant, bias, etc., and then analyze yourself for slant, bias, etc. But all of this starts to, in my opinion, bring up this point of what is the point of media at this point? Essentially, so many people disbelieve so many things that are being read and only believe things that are highly colored or opinionated. At what point do we say that I guess you have to be there in order to understand factually what happened, even though that isn't even assurance of understanding what happened? Should there be some sort of board in every country or international board that verifies whether or not something is based in fact, and any opinion is actually listed as opinion rather than fact? Should there be some standards in reporting where you get money if you meet these standards and you don't otherwise? I mean, this is a real issue
Yeah,
with in terms of the
Yeah.
reporting for the
I love
future.
this
I don't know how that's
conversation.
going to happen.
Yes,
Can I?
this conversation and David, Alexandra, we've sort of brought up within the past like 6 months of tech news, and Tyler's brought up as well. Like this is where media is, and just personally with just my small reporting, like as much as I've been a writer for like the past 5 years now, this has probably been the most sensational it's gotten for me. Obviously, right, we're in dire straits. Um, However, it seems that unknowingly to me that I had most of the information. I was able to post it in a manner where it didn't look like I was taking sides, and people and like news agents and people from BBC, CNBC, Reuters, and Al Jazeera are trying to contact me for my information, right? And they want to do background using my words, and it was interesting to me that like just as well I done my research, I did my due diligence, and posted what I knew was verified. They couldn't do the same or didn't want to do the same, and there's a lot of people that are just trying to catch a story. I've had to fend off so many because genuinely, like I'd rather spend my time aiding those on the ground, person by person, than doing a massive big media thing. But yeah, Alexandra, what you're saying is like really spot on. Is like media isn't necessarily the place where we're going to for these things, and I'm literally just experiencing it in my like small world that I've gotten right now, which is I done my research, I've done my due diligence, I've been reading thousands of messages and making sure everything I post is verified, which is very hard work. And now for some reason I'm the source, but I'm not a source. I just did my due diligence, and it seems like that part is missing in media now. And people will pay for not doing the due diligence. People try to get Twitter to take down my tweet. However, Twitter found nothing wrong with them because I was well within the guidelines and my rights to post what I posted, right? So it's interesting how just as well people will say it's fake news, but the reality is what I posted was right. It was succinct and it was even journalistic to that extent.
So the implications on today's war, Putin's war, I'll just keep saying Putin's war, is if we have a Russian population, let's just assume that they are, the majority of them are have been affected by the psyops and they are supportive of Putin's position. The implications on the war is simply, well, not simply, but the idea that the unrest in the streets having an effect on the Kremlin, on Putin, is diminished dramatically, which means that it will fall more on the pressure on the oligarchs to to initiate and drive any kind of I'll say the C word, just because this is recorded, it'll be public. But I mean, that's if you want to just look at the strategic context of the effectiveness of the psyops on the population, the oligarchs are going to they have a lot of I suspect influence on Putin because they're all kind of they're a group collectively. So that's going to be one of the strategic implications of this.
How
Well,
would we be
I would like
guaranteed
to,
that whoever would follow would be better?
I one of the things that this conversation stirred up. I'm a co-war era baby, and living in the U.S. and we're talking about psyops and stuff. Do you not think that the U.S. really indoctrinated us about the bad Russians? And I remember reading about our GDP and comparing it to the rest of the world and how bad Russia was. And I remember getting on a plane and flying from Canada to Moscow, getting off the plane, stepping into a city that was beautiful and meeting people. And I had some Russian friends in Canada who told me, when you get there, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to want you to drink vodka with them. And I don't drink. And they say, but Irvin, if you refuse, it's an insult. So my sample polling is very narrow, so I can't match up with these other polls out there. But one of the things I found out as I sit and drank vodka with these men and women is that I was an American, and the only two things they wanted to know from me was this: who was the first country in space, and who won or initially helped win the Second World War. And they judged me by the answers that I gave. And after that, politics we talked about. A lot of the people there that I talked to, this is a personal share here. A lot of people that I talked to didn't have bad feelings about America. They just thought that our propaganda and what we fed our people was not congruent or with what they had lived and what they were going through. I found the news media to be not that much different from ours, except they didn't give them all of the facts, where we had openness to some degree of what was going on in the world. They didn't get a lot of that, but our news is skewed, and so was theirs. So I just, here we are in the 21st century now, and we're still having this debate about, I think that we as an American, I can speak for myself, I know that I was a Cold War baby and era baby, and the things that I was fed in school about Russia was not the Russia that I went and had and spent 2.5, almost 3 weeks there. Stayed at the Maripol right across from the Bolshoi Theater and had a wonderful time. So I just, until we peel back some of the the noise that politicians and people of control that thinks they have control feed us. We need to be a little bit more sensitive that there are other people that are being affected, and maybe they aren't carrying the banner of the country, because I know in the U.S. a lot of people don't carry the banner that our governments put forth. My name is Irvin. Thank you for letting me share that part.
I don't even think it was the news that had such an impact. Do you guys remember the shows from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s? Like all the big shows were all like spy shows. I mean, it was
Big
either
Russian enemy.
yeah,
You,
like romantic spies or killer spies or whatever. And
One
every
trap.
Russian was this big, giant guy who killed anyone who disagreed with them. And they were sitting on benches meeting. Like, that's like my childhood
Rocky
TV
Four,
memories. Like,
Rocky,
every spy
right?
show I watched. But Irving, you must have been like the cheapest date because you didn't drink and then you had vodka. It must have been like one vodka and you were like passed out. Can't even imagine.
Tyler,
It's summed up
there's
in
breaking
one
news.
movie,
All Out
right?
yeah, I can
content you
the
has
Russians can
taken.
drink you under the table, all of this stuff. Like it that's the type of thing that I'm talking about, right? Which is like our propaganda just as well towards them versus their propaganda towards us. Even though they are more advanced than us in this right now. I'm just wondering how do we view when it comes to, let's say, saying that Russians are democratic or the Russian people are democratic, because I know a lot of conservatives in the UK just dislike immigration. Like literally, if they find it abhorrent and they don't want any more Africans, Indians, or people of other races to come to the country. And these are people in central England, and I'm wondering where they're getting their information. But just as well, um, Russia could be saying that they're protecting the Russians from the big bad Western democracies, right? Or however they want to color the names or whatever it is. But that could also be a level of understanding. But those people that probably have done their research, maybe they also care that Russia is um, a power in the world and no one can really say their name without, having the consequences. Like when we just think about like cultural nuances within Russians and how we see them as, in quotes, hard and tough and all that. Oh, sorry.
I've got to run out for 5 minutes, and before I need to get to make sure the conversation goes while I'm gone. Armish, you said you had breaking news.
Yeah, and apparently an all-out attack on Kyiv has begun. So several bombing and sirens
Okay.
is being heard. Right. So the big attack, which was expected yesterday, has started.
Okay. And Jason, you or Carl, you had your hand up in Twitter Space before we go back to Clubhouse.
I was just trying to point that he had a breaking story.
Okay.
Sorry.
And then I've got this one to contemplate.
Another breaking story, Tyler. Did you mention that on Saturday it was disclosed that Russia had hired 50 mercenary assassins to assassinate Zelensky that have been activated now?
Oh, no, I hadn't heard that. And then the topic that I have here is Ukraine's government on their official government Twitter account, which is simply at Ukraine. It says, "Stand with the people of Ukraine, now accepting cryptocurrency donations, Bitcoin, Ethereum," and then it lists their crypto wallet addresses. And so far, they've received nearly 20 million in Ether and Bitcoin. Binance will donate another 10 million. FTX and Chain.com CEOs made significant donations, and Ukrainian's government calling for crypto donations. That in itself is obviously a 2022 footnote for history, a rather interesting one. Now this next article from the Washington Post, I think can keep us busy for the next 5 minutes. TSMC, the world's leading semiconductor company, Intel, maybe the world's second biggest and most important, global foundries, and other chip makers have begun halting sales to Russia in response to U.S. sanctions. The global computer chip industry, including the giant Taiwan Semiconductor, has begun halting sales to Russia in the wake of U.S. sanctions aimed at punishing Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. and this is obviously an extension of the point that the banking system, the supply chains, the sky is kind of falling in every direction, up, down, left, right, and center around Russia at the moment. Cargo ships are now hesitant of even going to Russia for fear that they won't be able to handle payment and settlement due to the SWIFT activation issues. And it's very likely that Russia will find itself with bread lines again, as Putin was very fond of returning things to the glory of the USSR. Well, he's going to have the bread lines back in a few days. So, but now the chips are also going to be notably missing, which puts them at a severe disadvantage. And it looks like the dog pile is really starting to escalate rather quickly. Obviously, that could get so intense that it could force the strong man into a corner with a nuclear button, and that whole issue. I leave you for the next few minutes.
Yeah, so this is Tyler. You're gonna just throw that bait onto the room
Yeah,
here.
can I round?
Yes.
Can I
I can
code
say
that
something
by
about that
I'm gonna
too.
rounding
let.
out what I
I
was
want to
going to
hand it.
say?
I want to hand it to Cal to moderate the.
You throw all that bait in there. Okay, that's good. That's good.
Right
All
under
good.
the bus.
Did you
Good
guys
Trust
question.
ever
me.
discuss?
This
Did you
room
I
is
just
guys
want
full
to
of
ever
round off
discuss
what
what
I
happened?
say.
Well,
Cal,
no. Wait, do you guys just do you guys know what happened with that Chernobyl nuclear stuff? Was that real, or just since he mentioned
Yes,
it?
yes, Alexandra,
And
that
what
was
is he doing?
real.
And what is he planning on doing with it? Do
how,
we know?
how many different things? Hey, hang on one second. Like,
Because
so
it's
Tyler,
clear route
one
hand
second.
it to Cal.
the
You got to take
Belarus
me
to.
back.
What, guys, 1 second, please. Just 1 second. How many different headlines do you want to process at the same time? There are quite a lot to unpick
The,
in all of those.
the
So why don't
global
we? Yeah.
dogpile against Russia.
Yeah. Okay. Let's and in some ways the chip one is very interesting because
Yeah.
that's got Taiwan involved in there and actually supporting actively, I guess here the ban. Right. I haven't read that headline, but it's up there. Up there, right? Yeah, it's
Yes,
up
yes.
there. Thanks a lot.
It joined force
So,
like
Cal,
two
I
days
have a
ago.
question. If Taiwanese chip companies are not supporting or sending, have blocked the supply, what about other chip companies, perhaps in China, India, or around the globe? Have they also
Yes,
blocked the
Global Foundry, Intel, and everybody is joining force to do that.
Yeah, not joined
in
force.
Cheryl,
China?
Cheryl, can I ask you something? Because you know this industry really well. When they say, like, because of the headline that they stop chip supply, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean? That's like final chips, or they don't take new orders, or is there like a subtlety to that, or is it just like they just things just stop? Like they can't manufacture any of the electronic products because they withdraw the supply. Because I imagine there's a bit of a supply chain already in way, right?
Yep. I guess those orders directly from Russia or Russian companies will be stopped.
And it said it will influence their weapon systems because a lot of weapons need those chips
Yes.
as well.
I
Yeah,
think everything
Cal.
else, a lot of other things.
I wonder if it's similar to what happened with China because China supposedly had a chip ban, but then they had stockpiles and other ways of still getting their orders. So I agree with Cal that there might be a little bit more nuance here, and it might be much different than other or previous bans because of the
Russia don't
urgency.
have the technology.
And I have the local news that said that TSMC, the chips right now won't send to Russia as the Airbus, the name of these chips, Airbus, right?
So,
So
Cal,
I
if
have a
we take a
question.
step back.
If
Oh,
I
sorry.
can, I haven't had a chance. I wanted to ask a couple of, well, actually, I wanted to have a side note, possibly, and then also a question regarding the chips and what you're saying. I mean, which kind of goes into a double prong. A lot of people are asking whether or not his mental state, if Putin's mental state is normal, or if it's not, or if he's going through any kind of an illness. So, on the one hand, then it kind of brings the question, look, they've been helping Iran for 43 years now, and Iran's been dealing with sanctions and not getting, anything to the country. So I think as far as the sanctions goes, if he's at the right mental state, then he knows exactly what he's doing and what to expect and how to go around it, watching how other countries that have been sanctioned have been able to, continue on. So, that's one thing. And then also kind of a side note on that is going back to an earlier conversation about why maybe some of these people didn't leave, a little bit of what Alexandra said is people don't know what to believe and what not to believe. Everything is moving, everything is so fluid, moving so fast. And, these are people's lives, their entire well-being, their entire homes, their children, their money, everything is associated to that. I mean, I remember, during the Iranian revolutions, when some people left thinking that they're going to leave for their safety and come back when things calm down. They haven't gone back after 43 years. So those countries are close enough to Iran to remember some of those stories that people have gone through. And one, they're asking themselves, what's going on? Let's wait this out. Let's see what's going on, and where are we going to go if we leave this country? And if we leave, how are we going to restart in a whole brand new country? Are we going to be welcome there? Are we going to be able to work there and live there? So these are questions that can't be answered in just 5 days. And even though, yes, there may be a lot of forewarning or conversations, and some people might have known what's about to come or not to come, people just don't believe or trust what they see and hear anymore until they're in it and they see whether or not they're going to be pushed in the direction that they need to go to. So I think that's also, to consider that it's not as easy, because some people literally are thinking that if they leave their country, or even as immigrants, if they leave the country that they've been living in, they may never ever be, at least for many, many years, possibly not be able to go back to it. My other question was, or my question was, have you guys discussed, speaking of the mental or health of Putin? I mean, looking at, especially they were saying that he's been so isolated, especially during the pandemic. You look at some of the meetings that he's had with these long, long tables, separating himself from the people that have been visiting him for meetings. So he has been supposedly extra, extra isolated in the past 2.5, years,
So
or a couple of
we
years.
we
So
discussed. So here's the thing. Let's bring it back to this thing here a little bit. That's linked to that, right? So is Putin basically not on the reservation right now? He's not thinking straight. He's in some form or another isolated, not getting the right information, not making the right calls. Like, I mean, that's one hypothesis, right? And if it's that hypothesis, the earlier discussion, just to bring it back to a thread that we had a discussion earlier to this sense that everyone is now piling in. So what are his options, and how does he think about it? Now, what happens to those people? And Nicholas brought this up earlier, and Tyler. What happens to these people that are around him? Not just the immediate people around him, who are basically relying on him for their power, their money, their status, everything that they basically, we see that in these leadership positions where you've got a whole bunch of people leeching off one person who's the main kind of creator, or the person that's created the power, the center of power, and all these people around them. Now they're feeling like they're vulnerable. We discussed that earlier. And with all these other pressures on, the question is, how do they turn on it? Do they turn on him? How do they turn on him? How do they also engage the oligarchs all around the world to turn on him? And so that's one hypothesis. And what do we see next? We might see that we were earlier, people were bringing in headlines where people were seeing headlines where some of the oligarch children were making comments. I've seen here in Oxford the Blatnevik school, which was funded by a Ukrainian, but a Russian, real Putin guy, has, fundamentally is coming out really pro-Ukrainian statements in a very interesting way. The dean there and everyone. So there's some noise going on around where the oligarchs are now. They want to protect their positions, right? So that's an interesting point if somebody's got on that. But other than that, anything else, I guess.
Cal,
Cal, I
if I
had a
can, if I can
Someone
question
just
asked
add
earlier
to
about
that,
that
Chernobyl.
got
if I can just finish,
By the way,
because
the
Let's get
Chernobyl news.
Iram's
Hold
thing.
on,
One
Armis.
second. I haven't heard Iram yet. Yeah, go ahead, Iram.
Thank you so much. My earlier question about China or other countries getting the supply of chips or anything else that has been banned and blocked from some other parts of the globe was just because yesterday in that big room, there was a discussion by the financial analyst of 30 years experience from Iran, Harvard graduate, a lot of experience in economics, saying that the Iranian people who have been sanctioned got around those sanctions in many different ways, and he was making distinction between primary and secondary sanctions and how these countries have survived so far. So that was my initial question, that this block by Taiwan. What does that actually signify? What are the other routes that Russia has already established to circumvent these kind of situations? And that's a very logical evaluation that needs to be done to actually make the decision based on what is the actual impact they are receiving.
It's massive because
So
you can't replace the technologies that TSMC have.
Yes.
And you can see what happened to Huawei. Yeah, they try to turn to other industries, but they still struggle for that.
The
So I mean,
supply chain, just as a
Iram said
theater, though. Oh, sorry.
yeah, no, no. I was just going to say to Iram's thing just very quickly is that really who's left there? Because I'm not a geopolitician here. I don't understand. But it's China, right? China, Turkey, I guess, to some extent. Neda might know. But there are other sources now. Now, to Tyler's point, these chips and these technologies that I mean the whole world has been relying on Taiwan, right? So that's not going to be possible. But some of these other things, maybe they've got other sources. You make a good point, but I don't understand uh, where else other than the China kind of because the other Asian countries, Tyler, I don't think are going to, but they don't have much to give them, right? Even
China's notably quite behind on semiconductors, and they're trying to catch up, and they're investing fiercely to try and catch up. They understand that they need to catch up, but it's going to be challenging given the sanctions with ASML inability to support them, and Russia's at best going to be reliant on China's chips, which are not quite up.
Quite backward.
Yeah,
so
the
Most of
most
the
advanced.
most of the major semiconductor manufacturers, they are the US allies.
Yeah,
But
so
again,
Just like Elon
I
Musk.
would imagine that he has already knowing what to expect. He's a smart guy and he's been doing this for a while now. It's not his first time around. So, with him, as they were saying that he's amassed $630 billion, in advance of this, I'm assuming that he's already put a lot of that stuff already in the corner and just kind of waiting for that to happen. So that may not be his number one main issue or concern right now because he's expected. He knows exactly what the sanctioned countries have gone through, what they're missing, what they're lacking, what they weren't able to access, and I'm assuming that that he's been prepared for all of that in advance. My
I tend
question
to want to
actually,
think that
if I can just ask this from everybody because I wasn't sure if you guys discussed this yet. My question was, have you guys discussed his if he is, I know Kremlin has been vehemently denying it, but if he does indeed have cancer and Parkinson's, could this be his last hurrah? And that being so far away from reality in the last couple of years and just kind of not getting the full information, could this have been possibly his last big hurrah, that what he wanted to do was his legacy, thinking that he can get away with it and being prepared for it? Is that something that has been brought up in the room yet?
I think that's just speculation. I think very likely Putin has underestimated how the world has united on this Ukraine situation.
we
Right.
haven't.
But let's not forget.
Nobody's brought a headline in about health.
I don't think
So
I don't think I don't think anyone expected the unified response. I mean, even the people who are uniting in the response are, I think, caught by surprise at the level of unification in response. Meaning, the Putin's worst fear of Sweden and Finland joining NATO now seem more likely than ever. He clearly didn't anticipate that because so.
yeah,
Let's
the
not
first
forget
thing
So
is
it
that
goes
actually
back,
Elon Musk.
Tyler. Sorry, I wasn't able to jump. I had to jump out before. It goes back. I don't. I think Cal just mentioned. It seemed like they've sort of gone back to that general point. So the question remains. The meta point is whether we think that he might be sick, he may be insane, etc. The question is how do we get out of this? Do we get out of this by an internal coup? That was what we discussed, and the oligarchs are part of that. There's he gets taken out by his own,
Army.
or right, or the Ukrainians can be overwhelmed. We know that because we know they haven't gone all the way with them on the just on the weapons they used in Syria, for example, etc. So they could go further,
Right.
but that would be patently not be something that would be acceptable to the world. And where does this end up other than he has to go? It seems that he's painted himself into a corner.
Right.
And so either he goes by will or against his will,
Right.
and the only question is who's going to do it. It
Right.
seems.
Right. Looking at history, it's very likely that he will be something tragic will happen in the near future internally. Just historically, statistically, some people in his inner circle will turn on him. That's just historically, statistically, what is likely to happen. So now, I want to reflect, just to remind everybody that as things stand today, which is March 1st now here in Thailand, is America's most happiest dream come true. How things have transpired up till now, and how America would like it to continue to go is not that this end tomorrow. They would love to see Putin continue to be embarrassed and lose and waste money and resources militarily, etc., and be stuck in a quagmire in Ukraine in trying to take control of Ukraine in an impossible
Really?
occupation. Yeah, America would love to see him waste all of his military resources and everything and be stuck in a financial military quagmire. Rather than negotiations happen today, it ends. Ukraine says we're going to be neutral forever. We'll never join NATO. End of discussion, and it ends. No, America would not like to see that happen. Honestly, America very much would not like to see these negotiations that are theoretically underway near Belarus, on the border of Belarus. America's worst case scenario right now is a deal is made, Russia completely leaves, Ukraine agrees to never join NATO, and that happens in 5 minutes from now. That is America's worst case scenario right now.
I've got a worst case scenario for that, right? So I mean, if I'm tracking with you, I kind of I buy into that because the longer the I think one bad scenario for them is that the CCP comes in and negotiates something, or
Makes
seem
them
to
look good.
negotiate some form of
Yes,
world peace, right?
right. I don't think the
There, there
CCP.
was there
I don't,
was a report in the last 15 minutes that the negotiations ended and the shelling dramatically increased in Kiev.
right, right. Which is America's. By the way, America would not mind, and this is the sad reality. They would love to see Russia slightly get the upper hand in the aggression and be more aggressive, leading to more sanctions and more sanctions and more sanctions. America wants to see the world united in blacklisting Russia on every possible front, economically, and strategically and militarily, etc., etc. And for that to happen, they want to see Russia continue to become more and more aggressive, and they would hate to see the world backpedal and remove the sanctions that have already been put in place, and etc. Now, and as I've said, I'm of the belief, and I have my reasons for believing, that America foiled Putin into making this what is now America's ideal scenario.
The last time the Soviet Union fell down, it was supposedly just a rumor, and I suspect a similar kind of murmur was what instigated this whole conflict. But I think with respect to China, there's an interesting observation because as the world kind of unifies against Russia, the brand of Russia itself becomes somewhat toxic, and China has an aversion to that kind of risk. So they themselves will move away or distance themselves from supporting Russia as the whole world unifies around them, because the rest of us are buying Chinese products. So you got to make some
It's
difficult choices.
important. I feel compelled. I'm sorry.
No, one
We
second.
need.
All right.
I think it's very important that we thoughtfully use the word Putin versus Russia in this kind of conversation, just with the hope of unity longer term. And this is Putin's war. So I understand. I just wanted to offer that as a helpful use
Got it.
of granularity. Okay.
I get
Yeah, of
I get
course, absolutely.
I got it. In the same way that we talk about CCP and not China, right? So it's the same.
And the other thing that I think we really
Can I just But no, can
Yeah,
I
please.
just have said that? I just
And
to
the you. I'm
to
sorry.
Tyler's point, to Tyler's perspective, to what Io just said there. What's interesting is that if it is, I just want to put a pin to what I think I really agree with what Tyler's saying there is that, and if I'm right about understanding it, the messier this thing is, the worse that Russia looks. It also chases China away from Russia. I know that's maybe too simplistic, but that's what I heard from Io, and it kind
Yeah.
of validates the thesis that Tyler's
Yeah,
got
China
there.
has started distancing Chinese financial institution, Beijing National Bank. They have started distancing themselves partly from Russian transactions. They've already started.
Just like the voting in UN, so China abstain like vote, so they
I,
won't against it, but they won't pro it as
Just keep
I think there's a difference. Just if I might put 1 second, I think there's a difference, and I agree, Tyler, that America is not unhappy with watching this play out without feeling that there's a risk of a hot war. So I think that it behooves them because everyone is being exposed for the positions they're taking. I think also if I think that the dream scenario in truth for everybody is that there's so much pressure applied that the Russians deal with Putin because it is Putin's war, and that's what the point I was trying to make earlier is that we have to unite over the top, that knowing that regular people in Russia are either misinformed or subject to information war, or they're being controlled by they are captive to Putin. And if the more we can focus on that, the more that pressure America can see applied to the generals removing Putin or Putin getting removed, because that's the real path that they would love to see. I don't think
Tyler.
they
Could
want to
I?
see a total beating.
So I'm sorry.
Go ahead, David.
Tyler, yeah, thank you. The strategic military semiconductors. I thought it'd be useful to talk about the supply chain as a theater, right? Because if you just at a very high level segmented different parts of the supply chain, there are other very serious things that could happen with regards to oil, right? If you believe, if there's an assumption that that Putin has been planning this, which I'm sure he has, along with the oligarchs and stockpiling and kind of strategically, packing up for the winter in terms of supplies, there are things that he can do with regards to grain, food, as well as just the oil. People talk about natural gas and just turning off natural gas to Europe. It's March. It's still cold there. It's not as cold as it was in January. But I just think it'd be interesting to if you may want to talk about the different types of buttons. If you want to talk about nuclear, supply chain buttons that are still available to either side with regards to supply chain.
Yeah, economic warfare. Yeah.
Okay,
But
so
theater makes it sound very, very clean. I always thought that term was a funny choice. The theater of war.
the next topics to jump into, believe it or not, there's headlines not at all related to Ukraine. We've kind of gone through the tech ones related to Ukraine. Is that kind of semi-related? Airbnb is doing its typical PR maneuver of providing short-term housing for up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees on the bordering states as people are fleeing, and it's the hosts who offer the free housing, and Airbnb just enables hosts to do that and takes all of the PR credit for that, when it's really the hosts who should be taking all the credit because they're the ones taking the financial loss. We covered the Google Maps temporarily stops displaying live traffic data in Ukraine, and they could theoretically start showing Russian activities in Ukraine to help the Ukrainians. That would be amazing if the U.S. forces them to do that. And TikTok confirms it's rolling out support for 10-minute videos, which is up from their current 3-minute limit. So we're now going to have 10-minute TikTok videos, which will change the medium in really interesting ways and change the ad infrastructure as well. And the rest of the articles are quite banal, to be honest. In a viral tweet, Elon Musk says SpaceX's Starlink satellite internet is now active in Ukraine with more terminals en route. He responded to a Ukrainian politician who asked help from Elon personally, and Elon responded by saying Starlink's now enabled in Ukraine and we're sending more terminals your way, basically, more terminals en route. And Wall Street Journal has done some analysis that Russia's invasion of Ukraine could accelerate the fracturing of the internet amid pressure on U.S. tech giants from both Russia and the West to respond. And my friend Mark Scott at Politico tweets related to this topic. He says, what about domestic state-controlled media in Russia? I hear you ask. Well, here's the amount of ads. He has his own article about that. But this is the point about if Amazon Web Services and Cisco and the big internet companies who make the internet happen, the cloud companies, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Cisco, and the likes, if they decide to not play friendly with Russia, Russia might need to join the Chinese internet or create their own. And then you'll have now three internets, the Chinese internet, the Western internet, and the Russian internet, if it gets to that point. And it certainly, at the rate things are going, it's certainly on the table. It's not out of the question. And that's what the Wall Street Journal article is all about.
But Yuri Milner does have a meaningful stake in most of Web 2 in America.
Yeah, in the Western internet, as I refer to it. But anyway, we have tweets that our friends are sharing as usual, and I've pinned some of them. One of them is this one from The Guardian. It says, the first TikTok war, how are influencers in Russia and Ukraine covering the conflict via TikTok, and how is that being shared? Because, as we've discussed, the Western social media outlets are doing their darndest to limit the Russian narratives from reaching Ukraine or anywhere outside of Russia, honestly. And yet TikTok is a massive social media juggernaut, which is not American. So America has no control over it. It's controlled by China, as you well know. So that's an interesting dynamic. Now, it bears asking if the American social media networks, namely Snapchat, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, etc., are all simultaneously all acting in the same way of limiting Russian quote-unquote propaganda from leaving Russia. Is it possible that they are doing that of their own volition, or are they being demanded or kind of at least prompted by the U.S. to do that? Is an interesting question that I'm not hearing people ask, but that to me is an important question.
By their own choice, though, to make, as we saw at the beginning, China was suggesting that people put their flags out, and then they got heckled by the Ukrainians for doing that. So I feel like there's a lot of branding type strategy or branding type moves happening.
Also tells you a lot about China, that they don't really have the soft power that they think they do.
Now, The Guardian reporting a Russian oil tanker docked in Wales, even as UK moves to restrict access. Transport Department hints oil and gas deliveries could come within latest sanctions for Ukraine invasion. That's going to be the next big shoe to drop, is, as somebody was hinting a minute ago, how will the Russian oil and gas card be played? Because in one opportunity, Russia could weaponize it and turn it off, but then they lose all the money of selling that said oil and gas, which they desperately need. So it's a kind of a chicken, a Mexican standoff, where the car facing.
It's a paradox.
There's a game called Chicken. Who blinks first, basically. So, and by the way,
they do have pre-agreements with the Chinese for offtake to give them cash flow, it seems.
Yes, Russia could sell it to China easily. So it's likely that Russia could cut it to Europe. However, if they were to do that, the fear of them doing that diminishes by the day as Europe comes out of winter, by the way. I mean, we're heading into spring, and literally the temperature changes dramatically in the next month, in the next 30 days, in fact. So the threat of his doing that, if he needs to do it in the next week for it to be even meaningful, and even then, and I'm speaking as somebody who works in Sweden, the Swedes in March, we could handle a month without Russia's gas, honestly, is what they would say to themselves. If it were December, shit would be hitting the fan and people would be shitting the beds, but not in March. So there's that. The eBay is adding crypto payment options so that people can buy things on eBay with cryptos. That's a headline that somebody shared. That was PT Yoder. Thank you for that one. And Heyman shared this one from TechCrunch that an app called Reface, a face swapping app developed in Ukraine, has added push notifications informing its 200 million global users to stand with Ukraine, including by watermarking face swapping videos created by the app. So a clever way that a Ukrainian app is asking people to show their support for Ukraine in their app. Very clever.
Just to say that app is really awesome. It's a deep face or deep fake app, and you can see with my profile right now, I kind of swapped my face with Erwin Schrodinger. So it's a really goofy app. You'll probably waste a lot of time on it, but really, really awesome to see them just do a small gesture like a watermark, which enables a level of support to disseminate in the networks.
Shit, I just thought you looked like that, man. Jeez.
And as somebody sent me earlier from The Guardian, that two top Russian billionaires speak out against the war, Oleg Deripaska and Mikhail Friedman, and others, and several have made flights out and tried to fly to New York and apparently was refused and flew back, and there's all kinds of interesting activities happening with the oligarchs, as one might expect. And that is an interesting side drama to pay very close attention to, because in the historical context where the the kind of, blind, mad authoritarian figure loses his mind, and the powerful allies internally circle the wagons and decide to take matters into their own hands is this classic historical narrative that so it's going to be very interesting to pay close attention to that. And that brings me 10 minutes past we've done a 3-hour session, and I do have other things I have to attend to, but no doubt there will be more to discuss tomorrow. So
Tyler, can I just add something on the Chinese point? We literally just had the Chinese delegation give their address at the UNGA. If you don't know, there's a UN General Assembly session going on at the moment, and the Chinese, just since it was mentioned, I just came in to listen, but you mentioned it, so I thought I'd share it. It was quite interesting. They carried a really realpolitik, or like realism, like detached, cold-hearted sort of approach to this. They simply said all parties exercise restraint. Quote, Ukraine should serve as a bridge of communication between East and West rather than a front line of great power rivalry. And then they also added just here, China does not approve of any approach that may exacerbate tensions. That was essentially the core of their message, and very, as I say, pretty cold, pretty detached. No mention of humanitarianism, no mention of Ukraine's sovereignty or Russia's actions. So China's very much trying to, curry and maintain this strategical ambiguity at the moment, because I think they feel in a pretty tough position. So that was just something from the UN diplomatic.
And Tyler, I'm not sure if anyone bring this up, that actually at the beginning of the Winter Olympics, Putin was in China, right? They signed the contract about the gas pipeline from Siberia, from Russia to China. So actually, if you look back, Putin was planning all of this in the beginning. It's on the February 4th, they signed the contract.
So your point is that he was
Yeah,
prepared
he
for all of
already
this.
planned that how to sell this gas to China. So
Right. Well, he also moved his
The only
mega yacht
thing,
from Europe to what's that Russian enclave in the Baltic Sea called Kaliningrad.
And actually, it's a pretty high price for China, but yeah, like you signed that.
Nicholas?
I was going to say the only thing that is required for evil to flourish is for good men to do nothing. Chinese have demonstrated that.
Well, it's going to be an interesting week, no doubt. We're in unprecedented times, and just seeing Ukraine's Twitter account posting Bitcoin and Ethereum wallets and asking for funding, and people going to their local Ukrainian embassies to volunteer to go fight the Russians. And
it is just amazing, though, Tyler. Do you think this community? At some point we should just have a chill session sometime. I don't know when we do that, but just a year ago or even 6 months ago, how much of this would we have thought that literally, as you were saying there, right, as you're alluding to, that you'd see a Twitter account with with the Ukrainians putting up the wallets up there, and everyday people are giving them cryptocurrency. It's not huge amounts, but it's happening, and that's
100%.
just amazing what is actually happening. I mean, just from a people perspective, and I think that's why I always find a lot of the things that Nicholas has been saying over the months kind of interesting, where the power of when a whole group of people come together is way more powerful than any one of these strong men or these these situations. But
This is
yeah,
what we've been speaking about for the last year. This is harnessing the power of Moore's law and Metcalfe's law. Communications technologies create self-evident truths, but only if you can rely on the data and the images that are coming through. That's why the low-level information is so noisy, right? Once we have self-sovereign identity and we have namespaces that are built in cryptography, that's the promise of the technology, not of Bitcoin, not of Ethereum. That's what we need. Self-evident truths that are provided by people-powered software solutions.
yeah, I know
That's
you want
what's coming.
I want to say something that just came to my mind because Nicholas just said that, linking to something we started the whole session off with, in a sense, because one of the things you're passionate about there, Tyler, is saying that if you had the right data, the right information, and you would naturally come to a place. If you were sitting in Ukraine and you were a foreigner there, a student or something, you would naturally come to a point where you would leave, right? You would leave and you'd do it and you'd see it and you'd be totally. But I think to Nicholas's, something that just occurred to me is that there was so much noise for people every day, right? That they don't see it that clearly and they can't trust one thing or the other thing, to the point that if there were systems that you get this trusted information, the power of people, I have more, and even in business, I see this, right? Just on my stupid little, my mediocre world of business, where you see when you give your employees the right information, the right stuff, and you trust them, amazing things do happen, right? So the same principles have to apply. It's just getting the authenticity of the information, and
That's
yeah,
consilience. That's the unity of knowledge. If you understand that perceptions control behaviors, and we understand that misperceptions create by corollary misbehaviors, the more accurate the information is, the better our world becomes. So we all have an incentive to want to see accurate information. And that is what consensus does. We come to consensus. We've been saying this for a whole year, right? We come to consensus through input information, but when that input information, we cannot be sure of it, we are going to get misperceptions and misbehaviors. The more we can get to a consilient data information space, the more we will actually stop being able to be manipulated by tyrants. Putin manipulates the Russians through their perception field. That's their eyes, their ears, propaganda, media. And he exploited our system, and he did it easily, and he demonstrated how powerful social media is. And now social media is standing up and deplatforming them and showing that they really are publishers. They really do have the power to affect politics. And you have a politician running global affairs at Meta. This is the reality we're in. We have to acknowledge we are already in a cyber war, and the new future is coming, and it's going to be people powered versus state or corporate surveillance capitalism. That's the game.
There was
Come.
Nicholas. You'll appreciate there was a real proof point to your particular project that when Ukraine was asking for bitcoins, that was it Vitali from Ethereum questioned if the authenticity of the accounts, and it exposed the need for identity verification of Bitcoin wallet addresses and things like that. For the ability to
Everything stands on words. Everything we communicate with words, and those words have value and they have meaning, and who says those words counts. And that Vitalik questioned it forced someone to confirm, but we should be able to confirm self-evident truths, and this is where we go back to a digital declaration of independence, because we hold these truths to be self-evident is no longer true. So until we have self-evident truths that are digitally verifiable, we don't have a way to come to consensus because all information is questionable. And this is why this future is just an evolutionary path. That's why I'm always looking at the meta context as well as the macro, and taking context of micro, right? This is the future we're going into, and all of these things are, I always use the allegory of Adam Smith and the invisible hand because people misunderstand it. These are invisible hands that technology is revealing. We can tell when things are being manipulated now, but we couldn't see this, before 2016 or 2014 for some, and then some saw it coming in 2007. So, we're in this, and I think we've been in this for a very long time, and the future could be a lot better because I don't harbor any grudges against any Russian people. I don't think anyone in this room probably does. They know that they're either, being suffering from misperceptions because they're believing the propaganda. And do they really want to go and kill their neighbors? I don't think that they're a homicidal group. They're being manipulated. So how do we remove the manipulation of people's perception field? That's what's on my avatar, is that there's a perception field. It's your eyes and your ears. And, we've got to get to that next level of understanding what is self-evidently true or not.
I have the tools. Yeah. Okay, we'll catch you all next
So,
time.
Tyler, another point before you close. So, because of the SWIFT system getting blocked and banned, the people in Russia, I'm not talking about the oligarchs and Putin and his gang. I'm talking about the normal, regular people who may get impact from this ban. Would they be able to, or is it possible for them to use cryptocurrency to go around buy bread and stuff? And is it available there? Is it widely used there or not? I'm not sure about the cryptocurrency aspect because yesterday, not yesterday, day before yesterday, in that Ukraine room that I was running with Pewter for 48, 50, 52 hours, I was in there. There were people who were not with Putin and his worldview at all, but they were also getting affected by the ban on the monetary situation is not good for them. So I was wondering whether those normal, regular people be able to use cryptocurrency, and is it widely used? Just like in China, China have wide use of cryptocurrency. Anywhere you can go and scan a QR code to buy food and stuff. Is that kind of system exists in Russia or not? I
That
was
is not
wondering.
crypto.
That's
In
not
China, it's not
cryptocurrency.
crypto.
That's not.
She's referring to
Yeah.
the
What was that?
hold on, Armish. She's referring to the central bank digital currency in China,
Yeah,
But that's not so widely used yet. Yeah.
and
You
nor is
just
it
mentioned about the Alipay and the WeChat Pay.
I think
right.
Aaron, there's some misunderstanding of the
Right.
system
But
in China.
the bigger question is actually a very important one, which is how. And Nicholas, you might be best suited to address. There are people who are Bitcoin holders who are optimistic that this conflict is actually going to be positive for the price of Bitcoin, who
Hmm.
selfishly, as Bitcoin holders, are optimistic that this will hopefully lead to the tipping point moment that is the use that showcases the utility use case of Bitcoin, that
Sure.
it will force Russia to adopt Bitcoin wholesale, etc. You want to take that point, Nicholas?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would
As
not just,
briefly
by
as
the way,
I
yes,
can
there has
explain the different routes of travel here. So as we've said before, we looking at the metagame knew that the next step would be Swift, which we talked about before, which is why I was saying that it would lead to, and there would be this forking of people's comprehension. People would start to realize the benefit of currencies or cryptocurrencies that can be settled outside of the traditional rails, outside of the SWIFT system. So it will highlight the need for those, but it will also lead to people othering a technology like Bitcoin and saying, it's facilitating the Russians. So there's a very negative narrative that could be played through that. At the same time, most people do not know how to, self-custody and buy cryptocurrencies in a way that they are self-sovereign, that they own their keys and they own their coins, and that they have the ability to also avoid the chain analysis, which would expose exactly the relationships between them. So that was, what I was trying to explain, or badly explaining probably, the other day, and saying that I didn't believe it would go that way. I believe there is we always talk about three different roads. There's money that you can move through the traditional system, and then there's going to be a digital platform that is not going to rely on the traditional system, which is going to be the digital yuan, which is going to be an export currency for the Chinese, and that they have been beatering this, and they have an understanding of the Web 2 technologies because, like I think Bibi said, WeChat and Alipay, and they showed Jack Ma not to get involved in the finance business because that's the business of the CCP, as Cal would say, and that is all in the meta macro game around money, because everything is about money, because we're a globalized economy and we're all interdependent. So this is where all of the tension was, in my opinion, going to be playing out, which is why I'm always interested in people, whether they have an opinion, whether that was going to happen. So then you've also got this sort of misunderstanding of freezing the central bank assets as well, which means that they don't have access to necessarily money that is held in the central bank and is controlled under those sanctions. So there's some limitation of what they had thought a priori, which is why Putin feels that it's an accelerated attack, the way that the sanctions have come into play. And at the same time, there's still this back channel, which we know because of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and we know because of BBC said there was a non-aggression pact, and there was this sign and this very clear, relationship for supplying, critical, money to the economy. So, Russia needs to park its liquidity, and it removed its liquidity from the US and put its liquidity facing eastwards. So all of this has been clearly signaled to those who've been watching, and the pathways are becoming clear. There's going to be a new path. And the question is, when does that path get plowed? I believe that they were planning on trying to show some strength here, and I'm interested to see, whether the calculus of this new world order is going to play out. That there will be an Eastern economic powerhouse that emerges around the yuan and around the China as a new challenge to the dollar hegemony, and that the dollar, team unifies, and they really don't want to see increasing inflation and supply chain breaking. They really want to go back to the old normal, where they can keep running zero interest rate policies or close to zero interest rate policies, so their economies don't crash. And Putin knows that if he can outlast them, they will capitulate, because it's going to be extremely painful if the government has to put up rates, because the government's borrowed $30 trillion, and those $30 trillion at 3% is going to cost them more than the defense budget. That's $1 trillion of income servicing, and you can't afford that. So the game that's being played is multidimensional, and the people are going to get a say at some point, and it's going to come through the technology that has created cryptocurrency. This is mathematics, and this is, if you do it in a free open source technology, it is free speech in Western nations. It is the route by which we can evolve our democracies and our economies to reflect people power. That's our other option. People need to understand that.
By the way, so
wanna
the Ukrainian Prime Minister called
hang on,
for ban on
one second.
all the cryptocurrency addresses linked to Russia, and
Right.
some of the
Okay, thanks
exchanges
for Tyler.
responded to it.
Guys,
And
one sec. Oh, maybe you're not
and
hearing me on Twitter. Sorry, but Tyler, did you want to go? I just want to make sure
Yeah.
people keep asking questions and it
Yeah.
keeps going on. And you
Armish,
said earlier that you go, so we have to respect that.
yeah. Armish was just sharing a good headline that I saw as well, which is that the Ukrainians are asking the crypto exchanges to block the Russian crypto wallets, essentially. And
Demarket, Tyler, just an
yeah,
update. There's an NFT platform, Demarket, also responded to it, and they have secured all the funds, and they would be dedicated to the war effects. So I think this headline goes in opposite direction to what Nicholas was saying. Because of this, if you're trying to, I think cryptocurrency addresses of regular users, if they are going to get banned, then I think it's effectively
It doesn't go counter to
it's
what.
not
Just to
decentralized, and
you are absolutely right. You're absolutely right
so
in
that's why
noting this.
Bitcoin is not going up.
You're absolutely right in noting this. I think you may be misunderstanding what I'm saying. If you have cryptocurrency on regulated centralized exchanges, they are completely subject to, and I've been saying this as Tyler knows for the last year, they're subject to exactly the same rules. This is just VCs pretending. This is not the final product. The final product is a cryptocurrency that enables you to be self-sovereign, that enables you to be your own bank, that enables you not to be extorted, that enables you to do all these magical properties that I've been talking about, that stands above any nation state and unites people who are running the software. That is the full vision. What we're running at the moment is the centralized version of cryptocurrency, and some people in the Bitcoin community are self-sovereign and capable of maintaining good hygiene. Most people are not. So you're right in saying it is today's version of cryptocurrency is not the solution at all, but it's actually demonstrating the power of the centralized system to maintain control over cryptocurrency at the moment. It is true.
I want to fact check the Bitcoin's up 8%, I think, right now, right? 7-8% today. So yeah, but that's not related to the discussion. I agree with to Nicholas. I'm just saying you said it's not going up. It's suddenly spiked up. So anyway.
That's just a noise, Tyler, Kyle. That's just a noise. That fluctuation we always see in Bitcoin.
Yeah, no.
That 8% is nothing.
Okay, fair. Okay.
so Binance, a couple of final points here, and then I'm going to hand it to Carl to close us out with the final word. CNBC and others reporting that Binance will not be blocking anything in Russia because they, as an exchange, need to enable Russia to make this change. It's in the crypto exchange's interest that Russia be able to. They're hoping that Russia switches to Bitcoin and that they use their exchanges. That's good business for them. So the crypto exchanges will be the very last businesses to kind of ban operations in Russia at the moment. And
I think it says Binance will not block all, but they will block those that is targeted by the sanctions.
okay, and then on a strategic point, the Polish Prime Minister is warning that Russia may attempt to attack from Belarus, coming down and blocking the supply chain from Poland from the west, which would be a huge issue and that's expected to happen in the next 24 hours. And that would completely change the game fundamentally of what's happening in Ukraine, because currently Ukraine is able to, it's a supply chain battle is what's happening at the moment. Is Russia was having difficulty getting their supplies to their people on the ground, and Ukraine was able to benefit by getting supplies from the West, from Poland most notably. Russia knows this. Russia's now focused on cutting that supply chain, and if they do, that's a critical moment in this situation, and that could happen in the next 24 hours, so pay attention to that. Over to you, Carl, for the final word.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Before I give my little bit of personal news, I just want to diffuse a little bit of annoyance that may be from the Clubhouse side. When anybody in Twitter Spaces is speaking, because of the setup that Tyler has, we literally can't hear the people from Clubhouse. So it's not that we can't hear the people in Clubhouse over our own voices. The audio cuts out completely. So we're not being, Amish and myself and anyone else speaking earlier on. We're not trying to be rude. It's unfortunate side effects of the hardware. I just wanted to close us out on some slightly more positive news. I'm lucky enough to have 8 Ukrainian developers as part of our development teams. It's been a pretty stressful week or so as we've been working with the local intermediary that we hired them through to try and get them to safe places. One in particular has spent 4 days traveling Eugene with kids in his car, at one point getting stuck in the near the Uzhgorod mountains in -4 degrees weather. But I've just found out that he's managed to get across the border to Slovakia, and they have put him up in a hotel, and they've made sure that they've got food and supplies and internet access and everything else. So obviously, while there's a lot of inhumanity still happening and this situation is nowhere near resolved, I just wanted to close us out with the realization, or bringing us back to the point that there are amazing countries surrounding Ukraine at the moment that are supporting the refugees, that are taking them in. And there's a lot of really beautiful sort of support happening between people where, borders and race and everything is being ignored. And we're just kind of supporting everybody in this hard time. So just wanted to close us out on a positive note. Thank you. Great discussion today.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Let's do it again tomorrow.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
Tyler. Thank you,
you.
everyone. Bye
Thank
Thank
you.
bye.
you.
Thanks, Tyler.
Veronica. Yeah. Hope
Bye,
tomorrow
guys.
Thank,
better.
yeah.